Listen, guys, this week I'm just not doing it. Week after week, you guys turn into the Run Your Mouth podcast. I give you a breakdown of just about every single interesting news story, and I tell you about products I think you're going to like. I tell you about Yo Kratom, home of the $6 kilo. I tell you about Sheath underwear, the most comfortable underwear, the only underwear that will let you separate your dick from your nuts, and if you use promo code RYM, you're going to get 20% off. That's what I do. Week after week, you guys tune into the Run Your Mouth podcast. It's a recap of weekly news, jokes that I think I come up with about the news, interesting takes, products that you can use with promo codes that you can get discounts, unless they're already just $60 per kilo, in which case you're all set. But I'm not doing it this week. This week, I had guests, people that have come on this podcast before, hit me up, tell me, I've got all the information that you need about the new. You don't even need to do your homework. You don't need to look at any news stories whatsoever. I got a presentation for you. And so that's what we're doing this week. You want to know what happened in the news, other than what CPU God prepared for us, you're going to have to go look it up for yourself, because I'm not doing it this week. I told you guys I'm not going to do it, and I'm not lying. I'm not going to do it. But before I get into the segment with CPU God, I do want to plug a new business that I'm opening up. I think that there's demand in the marketplace for this business. I think I've got the skill set to get this thing off the ground. I think some of you guys might actually be able to utilize this service. And here's my new business. I'm going to open up the Anti-Bully by Claiming Bigotry Association of America. I didn't quite stick the landing on the title. It's going to be a very good firm. So let me tell you guys the name of my company again. It is the Anti-Bullying by Claiming Bigotry Association of America. And here's what we're going to do. Let's say you're on Twitter and you put up some funny tweets or something, and then some Jews come after you and they call you anti-Semitic, and they're out there in full weasel Jew force. They're going like, how dare you? You're an anti-Semite. How dare you say these things? And meanwhile, you're like, dude, I'm just trying to talk out against civil liberties. And they're like, no, it's what you said about me. It's not that I'm only criticizing you and I've never criticized anybody else. It's particularly, so here's the point. You're going to hire me as your Jew, and I'm going to go after the people who are claiming that you're anti-Semitic, and I'm going to be the one who will sub in for you to tell you why they're just being a bunch of whiny weasels. And I'm not going to end it just being a firm where Jews fight back against other Jews who are claiming things are not anti-Semitic, that are claiming things are anti-Semitic when they're not. I want to get an Asian, who can combat other Asians. I want to get a black person who can combat, black people. Like, that's the thing. You go out, you live your life, and then all of a sudden, someone from these racial groups, they claim that you're doing something to attack them, and you can't even defend yourself. You know why? Because you're a white man of power, and it doesn't matter what your opinions are, it doesn't matter what scientific knowledge you have, you're not in the group of people that's allowed to have an opinion. But you can potentially hire a representative, an Asian American who can defend you against Asian American, a lady who can defend you against ladies, a gay that can defend you against gays. It's a new type of legal firm where you sub in the right racial group to argue against the racial group that's accusing you. And once again, the title of the company, it's going to be the Anti-Bullying by Claiming Bigotry Association of America. And I'm not against hiring actual lawyers to work at this firm. If you've got legal skills and you're also of one of these, that's kind of the irony, is that we can only hire minority groups here, because we don't need any white people to work here. That's not what we're looking for. I'm looking specifically for Asian American lawyers, or just people who are well-reasoned or just willing to be an ass. You don't even need to be that smart. You don't need to have legal skills. If you're willing to just get out there and be an ass and fight back against some of these people who like to claim bigotry, then, you're hired. So hit me up. Resumes, robsnewsroom@gmail.com. We're going to try and get this firm off the ground, and we're going to try and help everybody not be bullied by face claims of bigotry. All right. Now, before I get into the interview I did, it wasn't really an interview. CPU God, he came on here. He gave us an entire presentation on some of the back-end technology that's going to be utilized for these potential COVID passports and the things that we should be aware of about the technology behind it. But there was one weird little news story about this Chinese guy who is getting undressed. I don't know if you guys saw this. I think the context of it would have made sense if he was, if we were like going to fight someone and he wanted to join the armed services and they're like, dude, I don't know if you're a real patriot. And then That's a great move where you pull off your shirt and you're like, no, I fought in other wars, and look at I didn't watch the videos, but I think he was talking about war wounds, but I didn't watch the videos. So I don't know what happened. It just seemed like he was wearing the wrong shirt for like a quick exposing of wounds. Like this guy did a full strip tease and he was really slow and dramatic about it. And it also seemed like he was around a group of people that weren't really accusing him of being not patriotic or that Asian Americans are some way less American. So it seemed like a little bit of an out of place display of, listen, I'm going to get undressed, and why is there a car driving right at me? You see, this is the problem with trying to broadcast in your car in public parks, is you think you find yourself a nice corner where you can yell about Asian Americans who are getting undressed and exposing their scars, and then someone will just creepily drive right up to your car and stare at you and go, I know you're talking about Asian Americans, and I know that you're not Asian American, and I also know that you haven't yet quite created your law firm of the anti-racist bigotry. I need a new name. I can just, from the fact that I can't reference my own thing 30 seconds after talking it, I can tell that I need a new name. Next news story. Biden calls infrastructure plan a once-in-a-generation investment because no one is dumb enough to try and do this twice. And also, if it's such a good investment, if government's so good at recognizing investment opportunities to get off the ground, things that will be essential for the American people, that we're going to drive massive growth, why would you only do it once? If you're such a genius that you can sit down and figure out, hey, if I put $2 trillion into roads, we're going to end up with economic growth worth $7, $8, $9 trillion. You're only going to do that once? What are you trying to tell me? You're anti-economic growth? That even if you can figure things out to a T, exactly where to spend the money that's actually going to drive returns? Or are you telling me that this is the only time ever in all of American history, past, present, or future, where we've got an opportunity to make an investment that will drive economic growth? If that's the case, then we better cut back other government spending, because this is the one time where we're actually seeing the stars aligning properly, where government funds can create some economic return. So you better hop on this opportunity and then, unwind all the other programs, because apparently those aren't good opportunities. This is the only one. That's your claim. And now here, I would like to play for you the Psaki lady who's given her pitch for it. And I've worked in sales a bunch, and after listening to more of this Jen Psaki lady, I'm starting to realize I think my mistake in sales is that I've tried to make sense. That when I talk to potential clients, I try and tell them about how my product actually works. I'm really trying to pitch some of the benefits of it. And you listen to this lady and you realize I'm doing it all wrong. You can just, you're better off saying things that make no sense. And here, let me roll the tape.
You just repeated what the president was talking about yesterday. You want corporations to bear the brunt of the $2.25 trillion over 8 years. But there are these calculations now that the corporate tax hike is not going to raise that much until 2036. So I'm curious where the rest of the money comes from.
Well, as was outlined in detail in our plan, we're talking about paying for an 8-year investment over the course of 15 years. And given that the investments are short-term investments, investments that are temporary, we actually would more than make up for the cost of these investments over time.
And one of the most...
It's an 8-year investment, and it's going to be, you see, we're doing an 8-year investment, so it's 8 years worth of money, but we're spreading it over 15 years, and the returns are going to be there, so this thing's going to be a moneymaker. Let's continue.
Colorful examples that the president used yesterday. He asked if people remembered a bridge going down, but only 5% of the spending in this package goes towards roads and bridges, and I'm curious why that number is so low in something that is being sold as an infrastructure package.
We're actually selling it as a once-in-a-century or once-in-a-generation investment in partly our infrastructure, but partly industries of the future, American workers and the workforce. And there are areas like broadband, which maybe is not a physical bridge, but 1/3 of the country doesn't have access to broadband. So that impacts workers who have been working from home, kids who are trying to learn at home, parts of the country where they can't have jobs, where they're working remotely. We feel that that is an area where we can improve, expand access, and as a result, be more competitive with the country, with other countries, I should say.
There you go. The trillions of dollars that they're telling us are going into economic development, going into roads and infrastructure and bridges falling down, is actually so that people can get broadband. Was there a big problem? Is there a major problem in this country that people don't have access to internet, and are companies not able to get them? Isn't that what Elon Musk was working on with Starlink? I mean, if there's an opportunity for people that don't have internet, can you explain to me why it is that we need government to make the investment in infrastructure for people to get better internet service? What am I missing here? I mean, I'll just go conspiracy, like government wants to actually own the infrastructure here so that it can better, not even need to buy the data from companies or not even need the NSA to hack the companies to try and get it? Or do they have an in with someone that Biden's just giving a huge handout to someone that they're going to make the investment into fiber cables at the expense of AT&T and now some other company is going to profit? Or are they trying to just stay ahead of Elon Musk? Elon Musk, he's making this investment in satellites that he can provide internet to these people. But government's like, listen, we don't want some private individual to be able to get goods and services to someone that might need it at a cost that's profitable. We're gonna beat him. What is going on here? And then, by the way, I don't want to foreshadow too much but like, are we talking about farmers? Is that what we're talking about? Like people that don't really need the internet? Are they trying to make sure that everyone has access to internet because there's some sort of a connectivity that everyone's going to be responsible for? And so they don't want excuses that you don't have the technological resources to opt into some sort of a tracking network? Don't want to foreshadow too much of what's coming with CPU God. He has an excellent presentation. But I'm just saying, why is it that government needs to make a cross-nation investment in broadband? I'm just going off her comment. I haven't actually looked at where all the investment dollars are going, but that sounds pretty flagrant. That you and I would have said, hey, $2 trillion or $3 or whatever it is, $4 trillion investment in roads. I'm not sure that sounds too smart. But now it turns out this thing that was being sold as an investment in our critical infrastructure and bridges that were falling down, turns out only 5% is actually going to that. Most of it's going. So at least sell us on an internet bill. Sell us on the farmers that don't have access to porn and they're putting their dicks into their cows. If that's the news story that you need to share with us, that we'll go, hey, yeah, I think it's smart to get some broadband internet going. Let's have that conversation. Now, lastly, before we get into my two segments, first one being with the CPU God, and then a secondary one where I talked to a fan about NFTs. Kids making all sorts of money trading crypto backwards and forwards. He's trying to get as many people into the market so that he can see what's going on with the orders. He's got Bollinger Bands. He's got technical charts. He sees what everyone's doing. He just wants money in the market so he can trade in every direction. He didn't say that. I'm putting words in his mouth, but he does give us some interesting insight into some cryptos you might want to take a look at if you made some money with Bitcoin and now you're starting to get a taste in your mouth for crypto, realizing, hey, I think there's some profits here. I do think this is the wave of the future. I do think this is the way to combat government because their chief good is currency. So, more to come. But first, I'm working on my anti-vax arguments, and I want to be clear that I'm not anti-vaccine in general, and I could see myself at a future date even getting these COVID vaccines. At the moment, I just don't really feel that comfortable about it, and because of, and I think other people, like, I encourage everyone to go get it. Go be my guinea pig. As many people as possible. You want to go try this thing, and then 6 months from now, we can find out whether or not there actually aren't any, side effects or other stuff. Great, please go try this thing and be the guinea pigs. It's stage 3 study right now. You get to participate in it. You don't often get to volunteer at these things, especially, without being able to sue anyone if things go terribly wrong. So I encourage everyone who's out there in as many different groups of people with as many different, let's get all that data. Let's improve humanity by all taking part of this study of whether or not this vaccine will work. No, but in all truth, I'm not necessarily against getting the vaccine. We had the conversation with Dr. Krim. I think it's good to actually speak to people that know medicine and not myself. He's told you he doesn't think it's going to make horrible changes. I'm not telling anyone who is in a risk category. Like, I also think it makes a lot of sense. My grandparents got it. That probably makes sense. They're in a risk category. Probably makes sense for them. My feeling is there's been something fucking creepy about all the misinformation around COVID. There's something really creepy about the way that they locked us down. And now there's something really creepy about the way that they're trying to push vaccines and create COVID passports. Now, is this all a thing where they're trying to create a boogeyman so that they can force us into, like, the way that we all just opt in into staying into our homes? Maybe we opt into self-tracking and we maybe that's been their play the whole time, and the whole vaccine thing has nothing to do with it. I'm just saying, I think anyone who's been following the news over the last year, we've seen misinformation when it comes to medicine. We've seen panic here that has driven decisions. We've heard listen to the scientists when they're clearly lying to us. There's a lot of, if you're just following the news and generally a little bit skeptical. There's a lot of reasonable things to be concerned about. And the fact that people are pushing this on us, not just pushing it on us, but in the bully framework of, like, if you don't do this, we're not allowed to have freedoms, that's the part where it just starts to irk me. And then also, I feel my mom started pressuring me to get it, and like it was kind of a funny phone call. So I'm just starting to kind of put together my anti-vax arguments. I did a whole Twitter thread. If you're not following me, at Robbie the Fire, you can go see that, and it's fun because you get the engagement. You get to write it right as you're thinking it. It's pretty immediate. It's almost like stand up in that way. And then I also get feedback because people are able to contribute articles back to me, and I read. Like I said it on. I'm a sucker for Twitter notifications, but I do appreciate that sometimes people in the audience have seen and read articles that I haven't. You can always email them to me at robsnewsroom@gmail.com. But anyways, go follow me on Twitter. I tweet every morning, basically at like 9 a.m. when I'm reading the newspaper. I tweet out the articles, and sometimes I tweet out jokes, and then some days I don't tweet out anything because there's nothing interesting in the news. But here are my anti-vax articles. First, as I said, I've got a general distrust in Fauci and government information. I think the latest and clearest example is you saw when Rand Paul got into it. Firstly, I mean, you can go back the archive of Rand Paul grilling Fauci, and I think on most of them, Rand Paul was right. He was right on the schools. He was right on a bunch of them. The most recent thing was he called him out for wearing double masks, and then it got confirmed by the CDC that what Rand Paul was saying was accurate, that people have been vaccinated. There's no evidence that they're, spreading viruses, and so they don't need to be wearing those masks. Of course, did Fauci come back out and make a statement and apologize to Rand and say, hey, I'm being full of shit and making scientific decisions based on conjecture, which I'm not even so 100% on that word. I mean, I've used it a bunch. I like the word. I think I know what he's getting at. Here's the next one. AstraZeneca. They clearly cherry-picked trial data. They forged some of that earlier information. Even Fauci's like, man, they shouldn't have done that. It's not going to look great for the misinformation. Now you get more and more stories about blood clots. It's just more and more stories about it. And at the same time, government's still saying, hey, it's better than nothing, so we want people to take this thing. So you've got company, we all said, hey, isn't it a little bit fishy how quickly these things went to market? Then you got one, it gets to market and finds out the information that it got to market with was like and this is just the extent that we know that they were being dishonest, but we know that there was some dishonesty there. Then you have that it came to market based off of phony data, size and scope of the phony data. I can't speak to. I can just speak to the fact that, they were trying to get it out there and they, at least fudged something. And now all of a sudden you got all these blood clots and you still got world leaders saying, hey, it's important that everyone who can be taking this, take it because, we've got this virus thing, which according to them is scarier than an AstraZeneca vaccine. And even though AstraZeneca is not the main thing being used in this country, Fauci himself is still saying, hey, that's better, people should be taking it. Our country sent a whole bunch of it down to Mexico. So it's still, even though it's not Pfizer, Moderna, or Johnson & Johnson, it still is a indication that the powers that be, including Fauci and our own regulatory system, which I think has approved AstraZeneca, is not working properly, and they're not being that honest about what's going on. All right, here's a crazy one. Vaccine death numbers are up nationwide. So if you look at the CDC information on vaccine deaths, usually you can see in the last couple of years, it was floating around like 400 to 500. We're now currently at 2,000. And if you look at the actual death chart, now you might say from the amount of people that got vaccinated, an additional 1,500 1,500 deaths out of the amount that got vaccinated is not that huge, but the chart actually looks like a fucking rocket. It's like blast off. If you could have somehow invested in the vaccine death rate future, your profits would be maybe more than Bitcoin over the last 3 months. If you had invested in that like it was a stock, like if there was an option for vaccine deaths going up after the release of Pfizer, Moderna, you would be rich as fuck right now. That's what that chart looks like. And so I'll just tell you the crazy part about that. I've read 3 stories of death in this country because of the vaccines. One was an early doctor, I believe it was in Miami. Then you had that hot chick a couple weeks ago. In both cases, they said, hey, freak occurrence, no big deal. We're not even sure it's related to the virus. Okay, if this information is correct, someone sent me the chart and I looked at it. maybe some random follower of me on Twitter sent me a phony CDC chart. But I think I read this in two places. So go do your own homework. I'm not saying I've got everything 100% correct here. I'm just throwing out the arguments I'm starting to piece together. From my understanding, according to the CDC's website, there are 1,500 more vaccine deaths than in a typical year. And also, I guess if we're going off years, that might just be, the last 3 months. And I don't know what other new vaccines would be on the market that might have caused 1,500 deaths. Now, if you want to talk about interesting news coverage, how is there not news story on 1,500 different individuals? How come there's not a story on each grandma? Because remember, if it will save even just one life, that sounds like a lot of death. And I've only seen 2 newspaper stories about people that have died. And I'm not seeing every single news story. I am reading the newspaper every single day. And I don't think there have been many vaccine death stories. The New York Post does like to cover them. They had the story earlier this week of the guy who took the Pfizer vaccine and his skin fell off. All I'm saying, if I have this correct, there are 1,500 deaths because of these vaccines, and almost zero coverage. And if the media is kind of in the game of creating hysteria, you think about the way that they cover other news stories, you would think there would probably be some coverage on that one. Maybe I have all the facts wrong. Email me, robsnewsroom@gmail.com. And if you want to talk about sensational news stories that might just creep you out about this, like I said, there's the Johnson & Johnson of the guy's skin, came off. And then you also had Johnson & Johnson messed up. I think it was a couple million vaccines. They found out that a couple million of their vaccines got contaminated. Now, luckily, I don't think those went to market, but I am saying that, these super trustworthy companies are somehow contaminating their own viruses. But the good news is if you end up with a contaminated virus, of course you can sue them. No, I forgot. You're not allowed to because these companies were identified from any lawsuits. I need to do a little bit more research onto the full scope of what that means and what that looks like. And if they use fraudulent numbers in order to get this to market, if that will still hold up. But if these people are so confident that this vaccine is good and that there aren't going to be long-term health effects, why is it that they would only bring it to market if the risk of long-term side effects are on you? Let me repeat that. So they brought it to market, but I think they said when they did the emergency authorization, I'm assuming that they said we're only bringing this to market if we can't be sued, which means that they don't want the risk of long-term health effects. They don't want that. And remember that this is a product that we really need and that they could be pricing however. Now, maybe that was part of the price negotiation was that they said we're going to offer it at affordable rates, but then we can't be sued. And then maybe that's an interesting conversation that government should let us know about where they're saying, listen, this thing was so important to get out there that normally, lawsuits are kind of priced into these medications. And so in this case, but then maybe we should change the way healthcare works in general. Maybe we should actually have a conversation about all of the, what do they call it, the malpractice suits, because maybe that's actually what's driving up all of healthcare. And if that's true, let's have that conversation. If you got problems and we know about it, why not address them and fix them? But in terms of news coverage, I mean, how is that not interesting that these companies have been, and there's no talk about it. How is that not an interesting conversation to get the CEO of Pfizer on CNN and go, listen, if you really swear by this thing, why is it that you would only give it to people if they can't sue you? Like, are you really that sure that this thing's going to work if you'll only put it into somebody if you can't be held responsible if something goes wrong? And then here's the last argument that I'm going to put out there, and this came from an interesting story called offguardian.org. I'm a sucker when it comes to statistics. I'm not good enough at math to differentiate fact from fiction. It's like, I've said it before, it's like horoscopes. You can tell me a nice story about how the stars are lining up and therefore I'm going to find love next month. And sure, I don't know, maybe I can't tell you one way or the other. And I get that horoscopes are, fucking stars, and so not really that scientific, and numbers are scientific. What I'm telling you is I'm stupid, and so to me, I go off of like reasoning, and so if something sounds reasonable, I don't know, I guess it sounds reasonable to me. That which is not the most scientific standard. I'm just being upfront with how stupid I am, so that you you know not to rely on my interpretation of this. Anyways, I was reading this article, and he was talking about how we are the guinea pigs for this thing, and how normally we're not, like, forget phase 3 trials. The minimum amount of time for phase 3 trials to happen didn't even exist for these vaccines. But this sounded really, really interesting to me. So I'm going to read it first, and then I'm going to tell you the way I understand it. And then, please, you guys are smarter than I am, so email me, robsnewsroom@gmail.com. This sounds fantastic and is a much better marketing strategy than reporting the absolute risk reduction. The absolute risk of developing COVID-19 symptoms without the vaccine is supposedly 0.88%, and with the vaccine, 0.044%. In absolute terms, the effectiveness of the vaccine is 0.88 minus 0.044, a risk reduction of 0.84%. Now, I think if I'm understanding this correctly, what that means is, like, naturally, and I'm going to make up numbers here, but just to show you the way that it's being marketed. Let's say, naturally, 80% of people that get COVID-19 don't actually showcase symptoms, right? And then you take this shot, and it boosts you from 80% chance of not showing symptoms to 95% chance of not showing symptoms. So what did the vaccine do for you? Well, it increased your ability to, I guess, fight off the virus and not get sick by it by 15%. So if you wanted to sell me this vaccine, honestly, you would say, hey, this thing is going to boost your ability to fight the virus by 15%. The way that they are marketing it is that this vaccine will help protect you from the virus, where it will reduce your risk of showing any symptoms by 95%. They're building in your natural ability to fight the virus, and then they're adding what the vaccine boosts it by, and they're just giving you the total number. They're not just telling you, hey, what the vaccine will do for you. They're telling you the total risk of showing, showing signs or showing symptoms is going to be just 5%. However, like I said, I'm not working off these guys' numbers. If 80% of us don't show symptoms anyways, you're not helping me from 0 to 95%. You're giving me a 15% boost. And then the risk versus reward conversation becomes, is a 15% boost worth the risk of the fact that you don't know if there's going to be long-term health effects from this? 1. 2, is it even worth the cost and the labor or whatever else of me having to show up somewhere for a 15% increase? And then the other thing that I think is important, and like, if you were the news, this is the conversation be having. Hey, if you're in this age demographic, here's the risk of getting long-term symptoms from COVID-19. Here's your risk of death. And that versus, it's a risk versus reward conversation. It's like, what risk is on my plate by not getting vaccinated whatsoever? What risk is on my plate in terms of putting an experimental vaccine? And then, just to bring this full circle, you can be anti this vaccine and not be anti-vax in general. The best proof of that argument is what I said earlier when it comes to the CDC numbers, that if it's in fact true that there are substantially more deaths this year due to vaccines than in a normal year, then that means that this vaccine is more dangerous than your typical vaccine. And so it might make sense to oppose these vaccines and not oppose all vaccines. All right, let's move on from this. The point I'm just trying to make is, anyone who's skeptical of these vaccines, I think it's reasonable to be skeptical. We could be totally wrong on this. It could turn out to be that everyone who gets this thing a year from now, they're totally fine, no big deal. I don't know as to whether or not we're really that, maybe we should be more afraid with COVID than we currently are. Maybe the vaccine, I can't tell you the answer to every one of your life's questions. But you know what I can tell you? That sheath underwear is really comfortable. I can tell you that. I like to speak to things that I can speak to. Sheath underwear. Use promo code RYM. You're going to get 20% off. You're going to have comfortable, moisture-wicking underwear, and it's summertime. Don't be one of these people that all of a sudden it's summertime and you're like, listen, I went into summer with bitch tits, so that's it. I'm not exercising. Don't be that way. You can change tomorrow. That's why I'm parked right now outside of a track I'm pretending I'm going to go run on, and guess what? I'm wearing my sheath. You know why? Because if it's hot out, your sheath is going to wick away that moisture. You're not going to deal with as much chafing, and then you put your dick into the sheath hole. There's not as much flopping around, keeping things in place. Great underwear for if you're working out. And so I recommend it right now. Don't think, hey, I've got my bitch tits and it's summer and it's over. There's still time to work out. And when it's hot weather, that's when your sheath really starts paying dividends. Comfortable year round, excellent for exercising, excellent if you're exercising in the hot weather. So be prepared for summer, get outdoors. You want to actually be healthy, boost your health. Let's speak to the positive. All this talk about viruses, all this talk, do what you can, control what you can, try and actually be healthy, get some exercise in. And, of course, if you use promo code RYM, you're going to get 20% off. I am very pleased to have with us Andrew at CPU God. He is our tech wizard of the Run Your Mouth podcast, and you're here with some real insight on what exactly is so terrible with the possible COVID passports.
Yeah, I'm very, very concerned. I actually was surprised to discover that the technology that I've worked with in my career is very much implicated in these things. And when I started doing research, I realized it isn't just a very, very bad thing for liberty. It's a really concerning development. It's a really stupid and idiotic implementation of technology that's barely ready for production, ready for showtime. And here we are suggesting it as a way to ruin the lives of really the entire global population.
So because you actually have some of the technicals on how the technology might work and exactly why it would be such a terrible introduction for humanity, allowing this technology to go live. But before we get into that, so I was just thinking the other day, if you kind of recap what's happened with this virus and why people are so willing to just kind of accept crazy things such as having a COVID passport or just staying in their homes into their lives. First and foremost, government kind of overstepped its boundaries by forcefully shutting down businesses and recommending that people stay home or wear masks and all the shenanigans that we've seen. Now, part of that was when there were at-risk people for this virus, we did this thing where we kind of felt like, well, it's not fair for the capable people to go to work. And I was thinking about this today. Like, we don't function as society like that. We don't all sit in wheelchairs because some people are in wheelchairs. We don't all stop having sex because some people can't have sex. That's not the way. I mean, I'm not having sex. I'm not telling everyone else that they can't. That's not the way that we function in society. We don't go, hey, because some people are poor, everyone's going to be poor. This is a weird thing that because there were some people that were at risk populations, as opposed to saying, and by the way, sometimes having to confront a harsh reality is good for people. Sometimes when you find out you're too fat to go to work because you put yourself in a risk category, maybe you actually make some changes to your life where you realize, shit, I guess, I'm actually kind of confronting my own decisions here a little bit. But anyways, we've done this crazy thing where everyone stayed in their homes for a very long period of time. They thought that there was this risk of death from this virus. Not sure how true any of that is. And now they will do anything because, like, just anything as if government's doing them a favor. Doesn't matter what the prescription is. Like, they're so bought into the fact that if they are not staying at home wearing a mask, that they're going to die, that, like, any alternate, like, you know what I mean? It doesn't matter what they have to give up. In their heads, it's the only way that society can possibly move forward, which to me is the great mind fuck of 2020 and the coronavirus.
Yeah, I mean, I'm in complete agreement with you there. And it's, my opinion that the root cause of this is just a complete and total separation of values between the various people involved in this relationship. You've got the tech people who are quite happy being miserable. I mean, fairly enough to say, I believe. And you've got, as you've identified, the majority of the population who just wants to get on with their lives and stop this. And the combination of these two things couldn't be more clear what it implies. It's going to be used to incentivize some bad behavior.
So when you say, I'm just curious, when you say that tech people are miserable, so in your eye, like, these are just miserable fucks, and so, like, they almost want more of a world of misery, and maybe it's not conscious, but it's just the way they're more comfortable. Like, what exactly do you think you're kind of alluding to there?
The tech space has, of course, a lot of different kinds of people in it, but the kinds of people that work on things dealing with, say, decentralized networking, peer-to-peer technology, things that deal with actually what's called like viral networking or swarm networking. These are the people who are also some of the heaviest, like, COVIDiots, like the really just dumb kind of zero COVID crowd that's out there. And so there's a real, I think, alignment of values between being locked down and just the kinds of interests and the kinds of socializing that these people tend to do. They were living on lockdown for years before 2020 came around. And so for them, nothing really that drastic happened. And these are also the people who are responsible for the technology building out the Excelsior Pass and other things like it. So I really think that it's an issue of just very different motivations powering different sides of these relationships.
So even just to make it like, give it like a less nefarious framework. If you're a person who really likes staying home and playing video games, that's your thing, you might invent more technologies for more video games because that's what you love. The same way I love stand-up comedy, and I love it so much that I started doing it because I love it so much. I'm trying to contribute to it and create more of it. And it's also because I want to get paid doing it. And I think potentially I could become great at it and make an income doing it. Those things are all true. But the less nefarious thing is it's part of my lifestyle, and so I've invested myself into it. On the same way, people who are really into their computers and staying at home are probably invested into the technologies that would allow more people to do that. And so, you know what I mean? They're almost like pro staying at home, staring at your computer lifestyle.
Yeah, absolutely. And then as a result of that, these aren't the people who really would go to that Billy Joel concert at Madison Square Garden that they're trying to, rope people into. They wouldn't go to the Brooklyn Nets game that they trialed out the Excelsior Pass with. So they're really only thinking about the implications of what they're working on, and they're not seeing the bigger picture because it's just not interesting to them. I think that is kind of just the unfortunate truth of the people that make these products that people use every day.
What is and I'm sorry if I'm jumping the gun on your presentation. You know what? Why don't I hand it over to you? You've got a presentation on exactly how the COVID passport technology might work. And not just that, but why it's something that we really don't want to see in action. Like, I think some of us just conceptually understand that it creates more of a framework where government is tracking us and it has more insight into who we are, and we have less control over where we move, what kind of things we put into our body. There's kind of the larger framework of just going, hey, I think this is creepy and I don't like the idea of it. But just from glancing at your presentation, I cheated. I was curious to see what was in the slides. It seems like you actually have the layout on specifically how the technologies will work and what they will erode. The things that technology was building that could have been good for us that this will circumvent. And so without getting to the punchline or stealing any of the insights, I'm going to hand this over to you so you can, this is the most prepared a guest has ever been, but you brought in you brought in the PowerPoint and you're good to go. So floor is yours. I'll interrupt and ask questions as I want to. It's my own little private lecture.
Yeah. Hey, I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about this because I threw these slides together because I think this is really important. The more I dug into this, the more bewildered I became and the more concerned I became because you can hear the messaging about this app and about other vaccine passports other than the Excelsior Pass in the media. And there's such a wide variety of stories they're telling you and all these different angles that they're showing you, but they're not talking about the actual technology and how it works. And to me, this is the scariest thing.
Is the Excelsior, I don't even know if I have that right, but is that just one of the main technologies that might be utilized for the COVID passports?
So the way that these vaccine passports work is that they're basically all built on the same underlying foundational technology, but they have different branded apps for the states that want to manage this shit show. And so a lot of people in the libertarian circles have actually been saying that this is something that, the whole like herder private businesses can do what they want people. They've been expressing support for this because of some of the underlying tech and because, of course, the whole thing businesses being free to do what they want. But instead of that, I'm going to show you how this is actually a really malicious perversion of the libertarian ideology that gave us some really important technologies for the future that will be getting eroded if we let this continue. So I'll get right into it. My whole goal here is to show how these passports actually exemplify the fact that the ideas of liberty work and that they really do see it as a threat over at the cathedral. These guys want to apply technology that was mainly made by libertarians to fight tech censorship and add central banking and protect our privacy. And they want to use this stuff in a way that actually encourages tech censorship and props up central banks and exposes people's secrets. And if we don't do something about it really soon, they will succeed at this. And because of how the tech works, we'll never be able to take it back unless a world even worse than the one we're about to enter happens to come. And this is what it looks like. And I just have to say, no one in their right mind ever sat there and said to themselves, this is what I want and need. Like, this doesn't make any sense to the average person. And the average person should never have to look at this and make sense of it. But these were in the proposals for most of the IBM bids for contracts of the various state and national governments that they got accepted to. The
so
ideal,
just because some people, I will plug the fact that this is available in video form, and I do think it's going to be good for people to look at the slides. But some people are going to listen to the audio version of this. So before you break down what I'm looking at in this slide, I'm not a tech guy, so I have no idea what the hell I'm looking at right now. What is this?
Well, right. And that's fair. I'll think about that going forward. Basically, this is a diagram of all the different people that exist in the relationship between you and your health service provider in the new system that they want to put out. And the diagram shows basically a number of different people that all have devices that connect to a couple of disparate networks. These connections all are basically black boxes. No one's really going to be able to get a lot of insight into how they work because of the sheer confusion around how this tech works and how new it is. People aren't really ready to audit these kinds of networks. And so even people versed in this tech don't really have an easy way to be able to describe exactly what's going on. And that's kind of my point, because this is the ideal relationship that we should have with our medical providers.
Okay, so let me just ask about the technology being implemented, because I would have thought, and I'm not a tech guy, I would think this is a super simple thing to do. All that needs to happen, it's just a couple data points. You come into my office, I give you a vaccine, I put into some online registry your name, maybe social security number, vaccine type, vaccine date. Now that's done. Now, to create a barcode that goes along with that, also not that difficult. So what happens is it goes into the registry that you've got in this thing, and then I give you a barcode that you put onto an app on your phone. Now, you can go anywhere, and they can do the barcode. They can go into the computer system and validate the fact that you've gotten whatever vaccine. That doesn't sound to me like there's a lot of tech that needs to kind of function there. I've seen barcodes on my phone to scan to get to a menu. So it doesn't, to me, I didn't realize that there was some sort of a decentralized network or something that was similar to like a Bitcoin type thing, like a blockchain technology here. I would have just thought that this is the digital equivalent of files on the internet, where you're creating a file and some sort of a way that I guess it can validate that I'm the person off of a unique scan, and by the way, maybe that system wouldn't be that good. So it'd be pretty easy to get, a fake barcode or whatever. But what I'm looking at here seems to be a little bit more complicated than that, which would suggest more of like the tracking and this being a framework for keeping much larger records than just whether or not you got the COVID vaccine. So explain to me exactly what this technology is and how it differs from that simple just barcode thing that I conceptualized just spewing mouth diarrhea over the last 2 minutes.
So the main difference is in that bottom right-hand corner you'll see on the screen. And for those not watching, it's the Hyperledger blockchain network piece of this equation. The invocation of a blockchain for anything related to our public lives is obviously something that's very much not battle tested. The only blockchain that's used with any degree of transactional frequency is Monero. And of course, that's to buy drugs on the darknet. And so otherwise, and that's a really small subset of the population of humans, right? So what we're talking about is a really weird invocation of what was meant to be a ledger to do transactions in a decentralized way, basically meaning to replace the central bank with a bunch of voluntary participants who participate in and contribute to the processes that would normally be done by a central bank. And so to take that technology and then to put it into this process where you'll see in a second, these are blockchains. They don't hold transactions for money. They hold people's identities. And it's a really sick and twisted, to me, idea to use a blockchain for, because blockchains are meant to be trustless and anonymous. You're not supposed to have to identify yourself to make the transaction. And so it's an inherently anti-libertarian idea.
Okay, so just shelve. You and I, we're big time libertarians, and I think sometimes the issue with the libertarian talk is we start talking in the framework of ideals, which is great. Those conversations are worth having. In this instance, I think that there's risk on everybody's plate, which kind of goes beyond the libertarian, idol. Like when you and I start talking about we should end the Fed, which we should, and you and I could describe how that would benefit everybody and what they're losing out on by there being a Fed. That's not as bad as if tomorrow, cops are going to show up to your door and actually take your wealth. And if we're in that situation where cops are showing up your door tomorrow and literally confiscating your money, I'd say let's have the conversation about the cops confiscating your money. In this case, when it comes to the potential passports and them tracking everything that we're doing, like there's more risk on to me, there's more risk on the plate than just like, hey, we had this cool potential framework for a blockchain and decentralized, and like they're repurposing our technology. So what I'm going to ask of you is, why for them is it necessary to have a blockchain technology element here in order? Because my understanding of blockchain, and I really only understand it in regards to Bitcoin, and the idea of the blockchain network was that it was decentralized and that there are incentives for everybody to run the network, and it's kind of like the hive mind. There's a lot of different computers that are running it. Outside of that framework, I don't understand why blockchain benefits you any more than having your supercomputers or even Visa having different databases in 12 different locations. There's no reason for me to be on everybody's computer. That kind of seems specific to Bitcoin, where everyone has a financial incentive to have the decentralized network. But outside of the financial tie-in, I don't understand quite how, quite why you'd even try and utilize like blockchain technology. So there's something in my technical knowledge that I guess I'm lost on the advantage to blockchain technology if you actually remove it from Bitcoin.
That's actually a pretty prescient thing to notice, Rob, because in fact, there is really no legitimate reason to use a blockchain for this. And in fact, it's naive and dangerous to use it. It's well past the fiduciary responsibilities that any engineer would have who's of sound mind, because the people who are building this stuff know the implications of what they're doing. They are, in fact, completely inefficiently, and just for no other reason than to put it in there, putting this blockchain in there, which I think has no opportunity for success other than to completely fail the system that they're about to put into place. My feeling is that based on what I've learned and based on the knowledge I have about this tech, I worked for a company that tried to put blockchain in a place that it didn't need to go. And I am shocked but I shouldn't have been, I guess, that venture capitalists actually funded some of these proposals that we're going to talk about now a lot heavier even than the one that my company's boneheaded idea was, which was to basically monetize BitTorrent style file delivery of people's content and movies. That didn't need a blockchain, and so it failed. And this certainly doesn't need one either, because it's absurd to think that everybody relies upon the same ledger for things like vaccines. Vaccines aren't money. We get vaccinations, and that's not something that inherently generates value or gives us any capital. It's just like a status that we have. And in fact, it's kind of a private thing, right? And so it's an odd thing to do, to both make this data public, yes, encrypted, but still public. And at the same time, fully dependent on everyone else's buy-in to work. That's just not how I understand medicine and public health even to work. And so I think it's a really weird and disturbing facet to this whole thing.
So I just to ask you to kind of clarify on that last point, what about blockchain technology requires, I kind of missed that last point where you're saying that in order for this to function, everyone needs to buy into it, which I guess to kind of run with that idea, I guess for me to go see a doctor and a doctor treat me, I don't need a council of 100 of my friends to be aware of that I saw a doctor and for there to be treatment. Okay, I think I'm piecing together your idea there.
But the other important component is that you've got these things in blockchains called miners, these third parties that are disinterested and only sit there to validate transactions on the blockchain. This is how people make money creating new currency for Bitcoin. And it's an extremely inefficient process that takes opportunity away from using those resources towards more useful and productive means. So when you take this wildly inefficient idea of a blockchain, then you apply it to this approach, everybody needs to buy in and agree to use it. Otherwise, the approach doesn't work. When blockchains don't have buy-in, people don't leverage them, and then the whole technology falls apart. And so,
but just to explain that to possibly people who are new to blockchain or new to Bitcoin, because one of the arguments essentially against Bitcoin might be, look at all the electricity this thing is using. It's basically just to keep a ledger. Why are we burning electricity to keep a ledger? Why is that worthwhile? And the answer is because sound finance that's decentralized will create such economic prosperity, it's worth the electricity that it would burn. And the reason why that's built into it is because you need this perfectly the system is purposely inefficient because that's also, and you correct me if I'm wrong, I think that's also what makes it so difficult to hack. It's almost like a yin and yang thing where like the inefficiency of it is what allows it to kind of function in such a diversified fashion, and then also tied to heavy electricity usage, which ties into like the mining rate and the fact that, there's actually a finite amount of it, which is what makes it a sound currency against anything that government's producing.
I don't think I could have said that better personally.
Okay. So now that we've established that, what's interesting is that crypto or blockchain technology is inefficient on purpose in a way that only makes sense as a value proposition when it comes to sound decentralized money. When it comes to sound decentralized money, blockchain is a perfect system for creating money that is scarce, that is a finite amount, that's decentralized. It's like this perfect thing where the inefficiency is exactly what makes that thing work. When it comes to any other application of that, it stops making sense because when you think about technology, why wouldn't I want an efficient technology?
Well, and so there is a lot of truth to the notion that blockchains are, in a sense, designed to be inefficient. Their design is what makes them secure and reliable over long stretches of time. But that's also a big limitation. And that also really only deals with the specifics of things like financial transactions. Medicine doesn't really work like money. And so it's kind of weird to think that like you can take the jab end of a vaccine and say that's like the money you're giving someone, and then the wallet that you receive that proof into is supposed to be an equivalent to a blockchain Bitcoin wallet. It doesn't make a lot of sense, and it's a very weird invocation of this technology, which feels very corrupt and corporatist to me.
So just to play devil's advocate, I guess one of the features about blockchain, specifically when it comes to Bitcoin, is that there's a perfect ledger and it's a perfect public ledger, right? So now I'm just playing devil's advocate. Mm. If theoretically you actually had a virus that was deadly, which this one's not, but theoretically you had a virus that was deadly and easily transmittable, and let's just go further with this theoretical, people did not want to willingly be around those who had not gotten a vaccine that prevented the virus. So we're not in the structure of what is COVID, where I put together a theoretical here. Then I guess a perfect public ledger of who isn't vaccinated would actually be a practical tool. If you were within the framework of a deadly virus that you didn't want to be exposed to non-vax. But even that doesn't really make sense, because if you're choosing to be vaxxed, you'd be protected from that person. So it still doesn't really make sense. Like what, yeah.
Blockchains are meant to work in, I think, a circumstance where people want to deal with each other and where there's voluntary, association going on. When you apply a blockchain specifically to learn who to avoid and who not to, I think that's where it becomes a really weird prospect, because it wasn't purpose built for that. And I think to try and force it into that framework could be, devastating, and its consequences.
Okay, so just to recap the starting point here, the build out of this technology is on a blockchain like the build out of what will be the COVID passport is being built off of a blockchain technology. That is strange, as it doesn't need a blockchain technology. And now let's move forward with, I guess, a little bit more of the breakdown of why, why the actual tech applications here are dangerous.
Yeah, well, just to also kind of set up the framework for what the media is doing here to also kind of disinform everybody. How they're telling us this will all work is that basically, it's a phone app that you download, right? And so we just got done talking about Hyperledger and this blockchain that they're using. And when you read stories in the media, you'll see that they say something like, you get vaccinated, then you download your state's app. The vaccination center will register your vaccination and put it inside of that app, and then you scan a QR code. And from there, you've got this QR code. You can display it to whatever, Madison Square Garden or MetLife Stadium, wherever you're going. And that's
then, by the way, and just to stop you there, that
Sure.
alone is state mandated phone tracking technology that you might be required to have on you at all times. And it's not just a technology that's going to track where you're going, but it's also going to be tracking, in this application, possibly just the vaccine, but who you are as a person from a health standpoint. And that's going to correlate to where you are and aren't allowed to go, and who you are and aren't allowed to interact with. And how far does that go from monitoring, whether or not, like, you're at a bar and you had beers and all of a sudden the cops, they don't even need to do a roadside sobriety test, or maybe you did heroin. Like, who knows? That's like a different level of not freedom, where it's like a lot of us are creeped out by, forget the framework of cops. I don't know if you've ever gotten like a red light camera, and it's just like, all right, at least if you bust me, I get the ticket. But if you're not even fucking there, like, and that's not helping me. There's no one who that red light camera is helping. It's helping your revenue. So imagine just that speeding ticket structure, but all of a sudden for things like, I don't know, you ate McDonald's after 2 a.m, or who the hell really knows what they'll be able to. And you want to get really creepy with it. I know that government's in the game of big data. I know they purchase it from AT&T. I know the NSA likes it. I know that I don't understand the next generations of AI. I don't understand exactly how they want to manipulate our moves, behavior, understand our thought patterns. All I know is that they're in the business of big data. Like, that's what they want. They purchase it from each other, and it's very important for government to get its hands on this. And so to think that we might willingly give them the framework by which they can collect more information on us in a more private way, like, even without getting into more of the tech that you're going to speak to, just off the top of my head, here are some of the things that are really creepy about a health app that will track you, that you will be required to have in order to go about your life.
Yeah, so that's only right, like, when you scratch the surface. Even I think when you look at what it implies, and also the characterization of this as a health app is even interesting to me, because when you talk about apps, who needs to be incentivized into downloading a phone app? Like, when I look at, someone's phone that's not mine, I'm just like amazed at how many just rows and rows and rows of apps are on these people's iPhones. Like, people download apps vociferously, and you don't even need to give them a reason. And so it really says something that they are trying to encapsulate the entire experience of this thing into a phone app that then you are going to be incentivized into using. You shouldn't have to give people incentives. Phone apps are just kind of fun, right? And so it doesn't foreshadow well what's coming. But the truth is,
wait, do we skip a slide there? Did I distract you from one of the points?
No, that's it.
Oh, okay.
We're going on to what this really is. The entire point of the vaccine passport is for people to not understand the true nature, I believe, of what actually is being built. Because it's not just an app that's on your phone. It actually consists of several apps that are on many different devices and may not be owned by you even. It also involves a build out of a completely new network. And it, as I mentioned earlier, is all being stored on a publicly accessible blockchain, a database of everybody's identity and of their wallet information, including potentially what's inside of it, like what certificates they have. The thing that I just need to stress is that truth management is obviously something that we really shouldn't give anyone power control over. But to realize that this is something that was mandated by the state should give us a lot of concern. So a lot of the ways that this stuff will work, though, will look familiar to people who deal with cryptocurrencies, for instance. Even people who use two-factor authentication apps, like to log into your Gmail account. This stuff doesn't look all that perverse, and even for like Napster and LimeWire and BitTorrent users, which is the style of network they're using, the peer-to-peer technology, this won't sound that bad. But you have to understand that these all were inventions that actually helped us simplify our relationships and bring us closer to our values. Bitcoin wallets, two-factor authentication, and Napster all were really brilliant ideas. That's why when we look at what the ideal healthcare should be, it's pretty obvious that we can take that and say, this is what an ideal transaction looks like. This is what ideal email looks like. This is how you would ideally listen to music. No one asked for this. And that's the important thing to realize, is that no one sat here and said, this makes sense. Someone said, let's solve a problem that hasn't yet been asked. This work started in 2016. This was ready to go before I even started hacking on the Ethereum blockchain myself. But this is
so I want to just pause you there for a second. So you're saying that the framework to have blockchain technology applications for health was built out a full 4 to 5 years ago, prior to, I guess, there being any reason for a vaccine type database.
That's right.
Okay. Now, without going into, like, I guess, the conspiracy theory that would suggest that they were waiting for this moment, are there any less nefarious applications or money-making opportunities that somebody would build this for because they just felt that, like, I'll give you one. Perhaps, like, because I've seen this. We had, for example, we had an advertiser on Part of the Problem, UBDI, really cool company, which essentially, if you understand, there's data being collected on you online. Marketing companies will pay for that data. There are ways that you can try and own that data and at least take part in the profit. UBDI, what they do is the data becomes more profitable. It becomes more valuable with them because you can participate in surveys, which then, even though you remain anonymous, you're just within the blocks of data. But since you validate some of the information, and by the way, I might not have this 100% right. I think he listens to the show, so maybe he can come on and correct us. But since you participate in the information, it's a little bit it's validated, and it's actually more valuable for those companies, and they'll purchase it from you directly because it's more valuable than when they purchase it from Facebook, right? So yep. I would think theoretically within the health arena, you might have a similar type thing where, as opposed to just my doctor, having my digital file and doing whatever with it, if I own that digital file, firstly, it is a little bit easier for me to walk into a new doctor's office tomorrow, I guess, for treatment, because, I as opposed to them having to call. Like, I remember back in the day when I used to go to I don't have a doctor now. I don't even know how they would get my medical file. But when I was a kid, I remember being at the pediatrician and there was like this fucking stack of whatever. I can understand why it would be helpful for me to have an app on my phone with my information. So in some rare instance where something happens, I get maybe, they can pull it up on your phone if you get taken by an EMT. Or to go even further, I don't know what really goes on in the medical data field. I do know, by the way, when we're talking creepy shit, I know that Apple hardcore is trying to get into the medical game. The reason being, you look at all the fucking profits in medicine, and then you start looking in like your Fitbits and your this and your that, and then it tracking your health, whereabouts, blah, 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 and all that. There's money in that information. There's money in treating you. So I think theoretically, if I'm just forecasting ahead, I might go, oh, there's value in actually letting people own this data. And possibly, I guess there's a framework here where a blockchain network might allow you to profit off your own data, or at least participate in that. So I just to bring it full circle, what do you like? It almost sounded to me like you were trying to say that this was specifically built out because they knew that they were going to have an opportunity, to use this when people were forced to use it, and they're going to profit from it. But I would think that there are kind of some good applications for, I guess a health blockchain type technology. So I'll just pass it back to you to, I guess, further explain why you think that this was built with nefarious intentions.
Well, nefariousness is kind of hard to prescribe exact motive to, but the things that I'm seeing are not so much about the fact that it was built before it was needed. A lot of companies made a habit out of throwing blockchain at industries X, Y, and Z and seeing what stuck. And I'm going to show that in a lot of the cases. I believe that's the case here with these vaccine passports, is that they actually were really just like one of many ideas that they were throwing spaghetti against the wall. Many of these companies, a lot like my experience, we were talking about, we could have a blockchain for managing rights, and we could have a blockchain for showing that someone has a license to watch this movie. And the thing that you have to remember is that engineers are trying to make a good solution that is efficient and uses resources appropriately and doesn't over-engineer for the problem. And, there's a certain degree of over-engineering that one could engage in where you're sort of like forgiven for it because, you're passionate about it and all that. But the amount that we're talking about here is, I think, a lot worse than what could even be described that way.
If I was built... Okay, so just to put this in, stupid people's terms for people like me, if you're building a bridge, right, and you've seen a bridge, it's got a suspension system. The new bridges seem to have the high-low suspension system. So imagine if there was a secondary suspension system that didn't actually support the bridge in any capacity. I guess that would be over-engineering. There's no reason for it. Sure. You're trying to solve a problem. I got to get from point A to point B. If you work out the math on the suspension system, there's no reason for a secondary suspension system. You're not actually doing anything. Maybe backup. I don't know. So I guess what you're trying to point to, and I don't understand the digital infrastructure here, but what you're seeing is this is over-engineered. It's almost like if I pointed to a car that had literally, let's just go buffoonish here. If there was a car that had a tracking antenna on the top of it, and they were telling you that the tracking antenna was important to the engine, but you actually built cars and were like, no, you could remove that tracking antenna. What would be a good example of this? Do you remember there was the South Park where they made that product better than flying, and it had a dildo that went up your ass, and then someone pointed, the engineer came around and he's like, well, that doesn't need to be there for this product to work.
But it was better than the airports, right?
For everyone else, it was better for the airport. So you're looking at this and just basically saying built into this infrastructure is something that there's no reason for it to be there for the end result that these people are claiming that they're looking for, which is being able to identify you based off of whether or not you've, been vaccinated.
Right. And so just like in the IT thing, basically there's a bunch of people now penetrating you unnecessarily just because it's a lot better than today or what the past year has been. And that just adds again on to the insidiousness of this, because as I said, no one usually needs to be given an incentive like this or a threat to adopt things. And when they're taking advantage of these adoptions by throwing all this extra stuff into the mix, it really just reeks of corruption and corporatism and, everyone kind of just scratching each other's backs. Because again, I think this is an important detail. This isn't new. The over-engineering of our culture and of how we run society. This is a workflow diagram on how Discover Weekly works for Spotify. There's no need to go into the details. For those who are just listening, the point is that it's absurd. You could make a playlist by asking your best friend or someone you trust for some good music recommendations, and it would take them like 2 seconds. So to go through this whole endeavor, right, of going into all these different network nodes and doing a bunch of processing on data that they've collected on you over the years, it never really was necessary. Spotify doesn't really resemble any sort of massive improvement in listening to music, just like how Gmail put ads in our email unnecessarily. And that's an extremely unnecessary amount of complexity to add to a product. And so it shows kind of who the originators of this tech is and where the ideas come from. They do not come from Satoshi Nakamoto, the anonymous Bitcoin inventor. They don't come from libertarian ideologues. They come from, paper pushers, middle management types. Because this is the thing: blockchain is truly libertarianism at its best. It reeks of libertarianism. If you read that white paper, which I encourage everyone to do, it's at bitcoin.org/bitcoin.pdf. Just about anybody can understand that white paper. It does not require a strong technical background. But as a very brief description of what problem Bitcoin solved, decentralized networks always had this problem of really not being able to prove that some currency hadn't already been spent. Blockchain solved that problem for the creator of Bitcoin. And it was really truly in direct response to the 2007 and 2008 financial crisis, which those of us who are libertarians would believe that the Fed was primarily responsible for causing. And what resulted from this invention, this singular libertarian idea, it enabled black market transactions for millions of people for the first time online, myself included. Ross Ulbricht and I believe other people created a website on the darknet called Silk Road, which used Bitcoin as its currency and relied on the blockchain's resiliency to service tens of millions of dollars a month, I believe, in drug transactions. And so this is like exactly what we want to see happen in the world, right? But vaccine passports are a terrible use case for blockchains, as we've just gone over, and for peer-to-peer networks, and for digital wallet apps. There's really no good reason to do any of this. And let's just go into why they're doing it. It's because of this. 2% of the world's population owns cryptocurrencies today. That's 100 million people or more. There's 55% of the country who are now using 2FA to get into an online account. So that's like 170 million people.
What is 2FA?
Sorry, two-factor authentication. When you use an app to verify your login. And then almost everyone in the world, except for Donald Trump, apparently, enjoys free music. And when you think about that, that means that there's these new attack vectors being opened up for untold numbers of people. And I think that really is why this is being so hastily thrown at us and incentivized with concerts and sports games and things like that.
Well, okay, so we got to explain, what do you mean by the attack vectors?
Yes. So when you deal with network security or anything dealing with computers, an attack vector represents basically where the potential openings are for people to exploit and to get access to things that they shouldn't have access to. The digital wallet side of the COVID vaccine passports basically ensure that your health credentials and your health data are no longer your responsibility. They're now tied to a device you own. And there's a value to that potentially in a different kind of device holding that data, but it absolutely cannot be your smartphone, which is making connections to the internet many, many times a second for every second it's on. The credentials that these wallets are using cannot be easily transferred, but they are easy to steal because you can take someone else's device and then pretend just to be them and open up their own app. And if they don't have a biometric scanner on the phone to verify a login, they could use someone else's device and masquerade as that person. These are all just the obvious problems that will come about, if we actually start storing people's health information in this fashion. Because you have to remember, that means if you want to see a doctor, you've got to have your device charged. If your phone's malfunctioning, you've got to get a PC or a desktop somewhere that you can use to be able to fix the problems. And these are just not what wallets are for, right? You really need something like a safe. You need some sort of a permanent device that you don't touch a lot and you keep somewhere very safe and secret to use when you need to. Something like that.
So part of what, and it's kind of a weird trippy thing. the initial thing that or a theory that we kind of put forward is that since tech people are really interested in technology and building on that, they're kind of building pathways for all of us that structurally tie you to technology, because that's the world that they want to live in. And so now you've got health, which there's no reason to tie your health to technology. It doesn't have to be that way. I can show up to a doctor's office and I can get treatment. But because tech people are very, like the same way I said, I'm a comedian, I like jokes, I'm contributing to jokes. These people are so married to tech, that to them is like a natural framework for things. Like you said, you and I could get together, I could share music with you and you could come up with good recommendations. The computer guy who likes playing video games, he doesn't want to interact with other people. So it makes sense for him to build out this whole algorithm, and then it almost corrodes other people's approach to life, because now they can more easily just sit at home and rely on the Spotify for music. And that's like further, like the social media thing, which we all know, it kind of pulls you into social media, right? So you're saying that this is an extension of that, but for health applications, where something that it really existed outside of technology in a good way is now kind of merging with technology in a way that it doesn't need to do. And then like it also kind of forces you more into your phone, where it's like you can't, if you're an old lady now, you can't be divorced from technology and go see your doctor. Like people that, if you were the guy who was like, I'm not interested in having a smartphone, I'm going to have a flip phone, you won't have that option anymore. You will have to have a smartphone. And then we also understand the way that these technologies are somewhat addictive. So it's like, even if you were that Amish person, wanted to live on a fucking farm, and you don't want to exist with technology, well, all of a sudden it's like, no, we're creating, like, you have to. And so that's kind of part of that. I think that's basically your larger argument here. Do I have that right?
It is very much that issue. It is an issue of looking at the vaccine passport as some sort of an opportunity to play with some cool new tech. Whereas on the side of everyone else who's using it and has to live within that system, it could be pure torture or hell. I mean, you're asking people to potentially give up their religion, to give up their values, their ethics, the people that they care about, just to be able to participate in this world.
Okay, now I'm getting this even a little bit more here. So let's go back to my dumb bridge example, right? Sure. Now let's imagine that the engineer, like you want a bridge, so he'll build you what looks like a bridge. But the reality is he wants to test that secondary technology that's actually not necessary for your bridge. So the bridge example doesn't quite work. Like it doesn't visually, you can understand what I'm saying, but like it doesn't quite apply here. There's a secondary technology that doesn't need to work here that the tech people really want to experiment with. And so they're forcing us to digitalize a procedure that doesn't need to be digitalized in order to force everybody to kind of be their guinea pigs for this secondary technology that they want to get a better handle on. And I guess, but what then is the fear to you, other than we're going to make, my grandma, who doesn't have a smartphone, theoretically would have to get a smartphone for the app. What are the other risk factors of, I guess, letting these tech people develop, I guess, their decentralized blockchain technology independent from Bitcoin? So like, let's say that's what they want to do, is they want to create a financial incentive and framework by which they can build out decentralized blockchain technology not tied to Bitcoin or current financial incentives. So what do you think is the motivation there?
So, I think that, again, you have to remember just to separate the different stakeholders. But when you look at like who maybe has the most unsavory of goals and what they're thinking about, I think that the thing I would say is like, look at what it's going to cause people to do. They're going to have to buy in further and have a harder time getting away from what we all know is a really oppressive thing. I mean, think about how many people you've probably heard tell you, oh yeah, my next phone, I'm just going to get a flip phone, or I'm just going to use FaceTime on my laptop to call people. I don't need a phone. Do you think that people will say that after they can't get any medical treatment, right? Or after they get denied entry into something that they care about? I could easily see it becoming something that you can't even go into church until you
I have a good example of exactly what you're describing here. I once had, I needed to go to the IRS website in order to get my own tax information to give to my accountant. He wanted the records of income for certain years. The only way I was able to get that information was by having a credit card. You're not able to, because they use 2-point verification. One of the couldn't use a debit card. Now, at that time, there was a stretch of life. By the way, this is not an exaggeration. I'm a compulsive person. As a compulsive person who's also intelligent, I sometimes have to stay ahead of myself and create frameworks by which I cannot act compulsively. And I'm telling you, this is not a lie. There was a stretch of life where I was going into the city every night. I would go to a bank in person, take out the cash I needed to get there and back, and be able to buy a single meal. But I didn't want a credit card with me because otherwise I didn't have money to spend and I'd be in a bar. Even I'm not talking about going blackout drunk or doing hair. I'm not even describing that. I can just tell you I was on a very strict budget trying to do comedy. And even if I was drinking 4, 5, 6, that meant that I wasn't doing comedy every night that week. So it was a discipline. I'm just telling you, that was at one point in time, and that we're talking early, I was compulsive enough that I had a working system where I got the cash I needed for the night. No credit cards in my wallet, nothing, because I was overspending when I was carrying a card, right? Now, all of a sudden, in order to interface with the IRS, I was forced to get a credit card, which I did not want. Because I might act compulsively, right? This is exactly that, where people who might not want to have a cell phone will actually be forced to engage in that technology for no real reason, other than governments kind of tying a service to that technology.
Yeah. And I think, the only reason they could want to do that, just remember, the only reason that they can feel confident in doing this is because this tech isn't new. These ideas aren't really new. It's just a new way to do it. And, the big finale will kind of give some closure to what all that means. But the thing I'll say right away is that the fear of missing out is really not the issue. It's the fear of how your decisions will affect everybody else. And to put people in that kind of anxiety now on a blockchain where everyone's decisions do have a sort of impact on everyone else, and you got all these other external parties who are facilitating it, and all these companies trying to get really close to people, right, and advertise their stuff that way, you start to see this could be a really, really horrifying world that we'd have to live in. And I don't know if it would be something one could actually escape from easily, because it's going to hit not just those of us who, seek medical care. It's also going to really hit hard the people who provide it and the professionals, because the agent side of this relationship, remember, we've got a wallet app, and then we need agents, people who vouch for the credentials of a person, say a doctor or a vaccination person who can stake a claim to the fact that you got a vaccine at such and such a date. So, because when you look at what it implies, it means that these professionals are going to be staking their reputations and their professionalism on a system that they didn't build and had no involvement in constructing. Typically, you seek out the requirements from your customer, but that's not how this is going to work. It was done kind of all in secret in the background at a couple of open source software hubs. The blockchain invocation is also further a problem because healthcare demands an inherently high trust environment, and blockchains are meant to remove trust from the equation. And to me, that doesn't sit right. The other thing is
by the way, just to kind of give the short marketing pitch on Danger, as opposed to having a direct relationship with your doctor, we're giving more control over to government and tech companies over your relationship with your doctor.
Right. And that's a weird place to be in, especially given the last year, because what it really starts to look like is that the pharmaceutical industry and the tech industry are kind of working together and putting up with various things and doing things for each other in order to get the return effect of being able to assimilate all these more people into this new system. Because the thing is, if you have a buggy application in your doctor's office, right, that's going to cause a lot of problems. It could delay medical treatment. It could deny you entry onto a flight that you now have to get to after the treatment. And even if the software has a bug at a stadium, there could be riots. There could be stampedes. It could be really dangerous. And all of this liability, I mean, the doctors typically don't even have liability insurance for anything that causes problems due to bugs and programs. And so, how are you expecting all these professionals to actually, keep a sane practice open? Well, it's sort of like they have no choice, and so the government will be able to impose this on people, and people will have to put up with it. But it's all just going to be a bunch of sunk costs. It's a way to hide inflation, and hide.
I love a good inflation story, but you lost me there. How does this hide inflation?
Well, because of all the incredibly unnecessary, wasteful, malinvestments that have to go into these workflows and into these processes, no longer is a digital agent simply acting on behalf of a person. It's taking the place of a person in this new framework. Now, if the software says this person isn't a doctor, but the doctor himself knows he is, well, the truth is going to be with the app and not with what the doctor knows is true. And so what it's going to cause is all sorts of chaos that has to be mitigated, all sorts of new liability that has to be insured, all sorts of new dangers and problems that keep this bubble that we've been.
So you're almost saying, as a theoretical,
it is a theoretical.
As healthcare costs go up, and the reality of some of those costs going up could have been just solely inflation, they'll now have something to be able to say the reason why it's more expensive is because we need to be able to validate everything digitally, and that's not necessarily accurate. I think we've said a lot of things tonight that are spot on. I think this one might be a little more of a stretch.
Well, so again, blockchains are inefficient by design. And they have not figured out a way to actually put this stuff into these kinds of generalized frameworks. And I'll get to more on that in just a second in the slides. But basically, it's a forcing function for new expenses that they're going to try to hide, from the consumer. And if they keep it within the system, there's a chance that it doesn't trickle down. Because if they have all this integrated in a blockchain, the benefit for the companies is that they get to keep the money really tightly knit within certain circles, and the whole effect of inflation being caused by monetary base expansion is lessened. So it isn't. I hope some people will kind of chomp on that a bit and give it some thought. It's not just me saying this. I'll be happy to provide some links to other analyses on that front.
Okay, and just to I guess state another concern is that I guess if you understand the way government works and the way they get their profits, it's not by offering value, but it's kind of forcing people through their, like, they want to control industries and limit them as much as possible to certain choke points because that's how they can make their profit, right? So if all of a sudden you take all of healthcare and it's got to be filtered through certain apps and certain technology, it almost becomes an opportunity for tolls, like that. Yes. You will have to pay government like a certain tax on your record or being able to get your information to a person. Now, I'm not saying that that's part of what's being built here, but just in understanding government and the way that it can profit, taking what was a free exchange where I could walk into a doctor's office and just potentially pay him and get treatment, and switching that over to a digital framework where now there's certain, I guess, certain requirements of, like the same way I need a license to drive my car or I need a permit to go do whatever activity. Like, you're now creating, I guess, some sort of a framework by which, I not only as a doctor did you need whatever liabilities, this, that, and the next thing before him, but now you also need to have the credentials to exist on Blink Digital Network, which means that there are opportunities for a company like Apple to be that digital network and now profit off of all of your transactions. And then what you and I fear most is like remove certain alternative type people. So if you've got a doctor who, I think libertarians will understand what I'm describing, where you're just taking what could be a more open and free market and funneling it through government and big tech.
Right. That's a pretty good distillation of the concern there. And, to go back to another thing you brought up a second ago, the alternatives, that also is important for a vibrant market, competition. And what really concerns me is that as we consolidate our companies, they're also consolidating again in this way, where antitrust might be a concern with tech companies. They can just use a blockchain and apparently get a lot of the same effect. But it's good that you bring up the whole thing about censorship, because this is another really big concern. The network that they're building as part of Excelsior and other vaccine passports, it is in its very nature peer-to-peer. And what that means is that the connections that are made to pass data between different devices on the network, they don't go through any middleman. The nature of peer-to-peer is that it's hard to track and it's hard to assign identity. And the other thing is, it allows you to get past a lot of regulations and kind of ridiculous laws. Intellectual property laws can be bypassed, which I'm not a fan of anyway. Know your customer regulations and other things from the Patriot Act. Peer-to-peer networking allows you to really bypass those things. And that's why governments, especially the United States, is our government, has always hated this technology. And if anybody remembers Napster from back in the day, and LimeWire and Kazaa and all that stuff, Mega Upload, right? Kim.com. These are not things that governments like. And so you might recall in 2012, there was the PIPA and SOPA acts where Congress was going to allow content owners to get websites removed from the internet just by the claim that there was a copyright violation. And what happened was Wikipedia and a bunch of other huge resources on the internet did a blackout day. And it's funny because they went on lockdown and sort of stopped serving up their products to people on that day. And it actually worked to stop a horrible bill from getting passed. But now that we're putting peer-to-peer back in, 10 years later almost, we have to remember that state actors are the best. They're the experts at hacking these kinds of messages, peer-to-peer. And so what we're doing is we're kind of setting ourselves up for a world where, the deep state intelligence agencies can run amok on these platforms and mess with them in a way that very few others can.
Which you're saying that all right, just to recap.
Yes.
We put forward that they're building an unnecessary framework for their intended technology purposes here. Now, our question was, what is the reason why they would want to do so? And I think what you're putting forward now is it will give them the data they need for how to disrupt current peer-to-peer or other blockchain technologies, because now they have a working framework for that. To go to the most far-fetched extreme of what that means is you got to realize that Bitcoin is competing with the real good of the U.S. government, which is currency. That's the product of the U.S. government, and it's really important to them. It's what allows them to continue to print money, distribute their inflation as widely as possible, and the more that they can do that, the more that they can essentially steal money from people. It's the scheme as old as time. Bankers established it forever. Inflationary banking. It's what they're looking to do. U.S. government's doing that on so having an alternative asset, which does not have the same risk of inflation, because there's that's the entire point of the Bitcoin, is that there's a finite amount. As more people say, hey, I prefer this currency, it limits the U.S.'s ability to basically forcibly rob you, because you have no choice but to hold paper currency that becomes less valuable as they inflate. Now, it's been put forward that Bitcoin is unhackable and that nobody would have the computing technology to possibly disrupt it. In reading about that, it seemed to me like the one people that might be able to do it and have the resources would be the U.S. government. If they really decided that they wanted to, they would be the only people with the financial resources to potentially build the supercomputers to hack it. So just to go fucking crazy here, what you're kind of putting forward is that the U.S. government, or also, I guess, they like to be able to control the internet, and they like to be able to control the way that we're interacting with everyone. So they don't like the peer-to-peer or blockchain technologies.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right.
So this potentially gives them the framework that they need to own a blockchain like to own a blockchain that people are interfacing on, so that I guess their scientists can better understand the inner workings and then possibly disrupt other networks such as Bitcoin.
That's right. And because of the effectiveness of this technology, remember, this isn't just something that people are making money wildly on at certain points in history. Bitcoin and then later Monero, which is where really everyone moved to more recently, these technologies enabled completely brand new kinds of black markets to arise, which were promoting safety of the customer, and they were maintaining the privacy of the shoppers. And I think best of all, it was sticking it to the DEA and to the war on drugs in a very big way. And that's why they had to give Ross Ulbricht a double life sentence for doing nothing violent at all. And so, and for giving people a way to transact peacefully online.
Has this been a long intellectual conversation where the conclusion is you coming out just as pro-drug? Is this just all the punchline was kids do more drugs and you can get it online with Monero, and that's why, crypto networks are cool?
I would strongly recommend, if you are going to engage in the purchase of narcotics, that you do so safely using Monero over Tor. Yes. But no, that's not the point. Actually, what we're going to do is actually, I think, give a slam dunk defense of Dave Smith's points about the Holocaust, but we'll get to that in a second. The last thing we want to talk about, which is how we get to that conversation, is the most important part of my concerns, which is the identity blockchain that they are building out. This new blockchain, which has all these insidious ideas and does not bring you closer, right, to your relationships, but further apart from them. So blockchain actually exists to remove the need for your identity from a transaction. You shouldn't have to know the other party if the goods are going to be transacted and if they will get Bitcoin for those goods. Bill Gates called that a bug, but it's really a feature, I think. I think Bill Gates is the bug. And vaccine passports will require us to inject extremely intimate details about ourselves into our computers, right? And who are the people that own those things? I mean, we're talking about IBM, Google, Amazon, Facebook, Microsoft, Walmart. They're open source programs, these blockchains, but they're being run on these huge companies' networks where we can't access them or audit them. And because of that, they may be open source, but they're not really free software. And when I make that comparison, there's the Gratis versus Libre article on Wikipedia. I encourage you to read it to get the difference. This is a world where the anarchist leftists have a much bigger head start on the software world. But what it means is that there's no guarantees in these programs that they can't restrict you. There's no warranty. There's no service agreement. There's no guarantee of privacy or safety. So where in our right minds do we come up with the idea that this is a good way to deal with the problem of vaccination proof? We have to just look at the stakeholders to really get the answer. There's an enormous number of them, and they have a lot of money between them, and they often deal with one another. Big tech, finance, world governments, education systems, law enforcement, health and pharma, and of course the military industrial complex. The open source projects that these stakeholders are funding, you can see a list of them below, but I'll read a couple off. There's Amazon, Comcast, CVS Health, Siemens, UBS, State Farm, Microsoft. These aren't like spring chickens, Let me talk about Hyperledger, because that's what IBM is backing, and it's the thing that I'm really worried about for the Excelsior Pass. As you can see on the screen, but I'll read it to the listening audience too, Hyperledger describes themselves as an open source community focused on developing frameworks for enterprise-grade blockchain deployment. Does any of that address individual health or anything related, right, to individual concerns of people? No. It's a neutral home, they say, for various distributed frameworks, including, and then they list a bunch of their products. But ultimately, it's easy to distill Hyperledger as this. IBM, Microsoft, Intel, and the National Bank of Cambodia all of which are big Hyperledger stakeholders, they all got together and they made a blockchain during the pandemic, and they called it Bakong, I think. Whatever. And I'm not lying. This is what they trialed the Excelsior Pass on before they gave it to us. The National Bank of Cambodia apparently had no way to do mobile payments and such. And so they took this blockchain and they applied it to the National Bank of Cambodia. And then somehow they were able to turn that into a contract for Excelsior Pass. The people who did this deal, this contract with Cuomo, they probably didn't even have to explain all of this tech success. It was probably such a corrupt deal, right, that no one even discussed the adequacy of their approach. When you look at the website for Hyperledger, they literally have a section called special interest groups. I'm not kidding. And when you look at the sectors that they call special interest groups, we deal with healthcare is the first one they list, then the public sector, social impact, you know what that means, telecom, trade and finance, and of course the supply chain. The masks are what come to mind immediately. But this all brings me to the Holocaust comparisons. This is very important because I don't want to add to the fire, but I do want to extinguish it, because anybody who's saying that it's not an apt comparison doesn't know about what I'm about to tell you. IBM was a major participant in the Holocaust and was a major technical provider for Hitler's ability to automate the oppression of all of the Jews and other people that got killed. And if you look, I have highlighted on the left image that IBM is one of the chosen Hyperledger vendors. They are indeed a participant in this new horrible thing. And when you look further into the history, right, it's kind of easy to conclude that you really shouldn't use technology to segment people based on arbitrary things, because it never leads anywhere good. Pictured on this slide, for those who can't see it, is an actual IBM device. It's like an early old school punch card computer that the Nazis used to categorize and keep track of all of their prisoners and people that they wanted to kill. There's heavily researched information about this. There's been documentaries made about this. IBM's participation in the Holocaust is without question. And so it just really speaks, I think, to the enormity of the situation that we've got yet another attempt at automating the analysis of individual human beings using new technology for the time. The patterns alone are significant. But then when you look at the actual intent of implementing this technology, what was it for? The Holocaust used the badge of shame, right, the Juden star, to actually incentivize people to want to comply in order to not have such a bad life. But it didn't really stay there for very long. It immediately led to increasingly horrific things and then led full on to the Holocaust. And, that's why the comparison was wrong, but only because it understates the dangers of today's proposal. The Nazis wouldn't have ever even been able to dream of what's now possible because of this technology build out. And this event now, nor the Holocaust, could have ever happened with only the participation of the corporations that are stakeholders in this. It had to involve the initiation of force by government. And that's why we need to very much understand this as a community, as an intellectual community, that the government wants to kill the most successful libertarian technologies ever. And that's what this is all about. We can't fall for it. They've been wanting to do this for years. They tried to do it right after Bitcoin happened, with the PIPA and SOPA thing, to really lock down people's ability to communicate and to be able to interact peacefully with each other. Now they've done it because the tech companies want out. They want to be able to run their businesses. Disney wants to reopen Disney World. So no one's saying no this time. Everybody has been left victim to this. And a lot of people will choose to do what I'm suggesting you don't do, which is do not participate in this. What's possible because of this technology is very dangerous, both for your health and for your mental well-being. if it does not go away, these passport vaccines, these vaccine passports, you have to avoid the major cities because compliance will be required to use important public services. You will also, as I said earlier, want to get ready for inflation because blockchains aren't efficient, and everyone knows that. The finance firms, as we talked about earlier, will use these costs in a way to try to keep inflation out of the markets, and the malinvestments that will be passed down could be horrendous. You also want to work on self-reliance. Just make sure that if anything does fail, because it will fail catastrophically when it does, that you're ready to, survive that. And then utilize truly decentralized black markets and avoid the hype beasts. So what I mean by that is buy Monero, not NFTs. If you want to actually save yourself and transact privately and securely on the internet, and you want to do it through an alternative currency, don't use the blockchain built by JP Morgan Chase. Use the one built by free speech open software like Monero. If you like drugs, get Monero.
I'm not familiar with Monero, so I just give me the short pitch or why like you would take that over like an Ethereum. I just did. This is the first time I'm hearing of Monero. My knowledge of crypto at the moment is essentially that I read the Bitcoin Standard. That's it, and I bought some. And luckily, I bought some Bitcoin when it was at like 5K. So I did well with my Bitcoin purchase. I wish I bought a lot more. But at least I bought some. So give me the pitch on Monero.
Well, the problem with Bitcoin actually was that it was the first of its kind. And while an amazing step forward, it had many problems. The efficiency is one. The other one, though, is that people said it was anonymous. And to some degree, that was sort of true. But it didn't take long for people to figure out ways to exploit it. And so in theory, the government could have access to a lot of people's transactions for maybe what was illegal or something to that degree. Monero fixes these problems in a very serious way, in a way that does not actually hinder efficiency. In fact, it makes it more efficient. And it actually adds a layer of decentralization to the mix because it allows you to hold the entire blockchain on your own systems, thereby not relying a central authority to do it for you. And it gives you more power over your money than Bitcoin does.
Okay, I think just for the sake of the Run Your Mouth listeners, and I want everyone to, CPU God came out to my Philadelphia show. He's now been on the show twice with incredible insights. This is his third time coming in with the fucking power-packed presentation. The last time someone pitched a crypto on my show, I started getting emails saying that the person worked for that company.
Oh, no.
Just for the sake of people knowing that you're legitimately like, hey, I'm just recommending Monero. I assume that you're not like the wizard behind that crypto and you're trying to get the Run Your Mouthers to buy in.
I don't have a PhD in mathematics. I cannot write that stuff. Believe me, all I am is interested in protecting people's privacy.
There you go. See, everyone listening, you got the honest pitch that Monero's a worthwhile crypto. I'm going to have to do some I've been wanting to buy my Dogecoin. I've been wanting to buy it, and I've just been lazy. It was up like 30% today just off of nonsense. And okay. But anyways, let's
can I just say about Elon Musk and all that? Because this is the other thing I think you guys all need to be aware of. Anyone that's listening, watching, there's been an unprecedented amount of interest in blockchains, especially Bitcoin and things like this. And I think that the introduction of these Excelsior passes gives some indication as to why companies like Square and Tesla have a huge interest in the blockchain and in owning cryptocurrency. They may, in fact, be part of this grift. And we have to realize that, right? Because they got us all ready. These NFTs, another way to build trust into an alternative blockchain that could very well just erode our liberties and make life worse for us all.
Wow. Can I tell you something? I wish I didn't ask so many questions at the beginning because you had a power-packed ending here. You got into Nazi stuff, talking about IBM and like technology. So I apologize to Run Your Mouth listeners for all my crazy inputs, but let's are there more slides? I don't know. I think
that's it. Right, this nightmare is over.
No, this was great and amazingly insightful, but let's button it up.
Yes. So can I say then the thing that I would want to stress is that we have a limited time. to deal with this. There have been other opportunities to do this, and we have successfully fought them. There is not the current infrastructure in place, socially, politically, nothing. No one's interested in directly headbutting this problem like happened last time with SOPA and PIPA. So I encourage everybody who's worried about this to simply talk about it with everyone you know, because we have very few opportunities, most of us these days, to get in front of other people. But if you're going to be in front of other people, I recommend that you have a dialogue with others about this. I think what you'll find is that a lot of people already very much agree with all of these points, and from all different persuasions and political backgrounds. It's a thing that everyone just knows is wrong and bad. And there's only a contingency of COVIDiots and other people who just enjoy this lifestyle that it imposes on us. They're the ones defending it for purely selfish reasons.
It's interesting because last night I was just in an open mic, and I'm happy to be trying to work on stuff, and I'm really trying to get some new material together for the summer because I got some fun gigs that like I'm really looking forward to do, but I actually need some material that works. Anyways, I was curious to know some of the other comics, and typically I do find I find. I'm making generalizations here. I find that most comics skew a little bit more left than I do, but without your rare, in New York, they can be a little bit douchier leftists and not listening. I find that comics are kind of critical thinkers. And so like, they're actually willing to have a conversation with you. And there's actually some insight there. Now that that's not always true. And it's a little bit less true with certain classes of comedians in New York, not all of them. But anyways, I showed up to the open mic last night. There's a couple of guys in Connecticut now I'm friendly with. And I was like, out of curiosity, and you guys getting in the vaccine? And they're like, no. And I'm like, oh, okay, why? And like, none of them are, I don't think any of them are libertarians. I would doubt that they're even like Republicans, but they're just like, I'm creeped out by it. And then I started mentioning, what have you guys heard about the COVID? Like, what are you talking about? I was like, oh, they might. And like, they were like, holy shit, I haven't heard about, like, they were just like level 10 spooked. And it was before I even gave them it was just, they might require proof of the fact, like, you know what I mean? They were just spooked by that. So I think you're right that people are somewhat like, except for the people that feel like, oh, there's death out there and government's trying to save us from death, and here's a solution for us to be able to get back to life. There are those individuals. And then I guess the comics, who are the people I'm hanging out with, who are out doing open mics now, kind of realize, no, I got to be living my life, and this thing's been stupid. So they don't fall into the same, they don't think the same risk is on their plate unless government comes in with this tech solution. So they're a little bit more open to yours and I's perspective. So for people,
same with the music people too.
Yeah, I'm not surprised by that.
It's the same thing. You have a very close relationship with your audience, right? Comics and people who perform on stage, they're directly in front of the people that want to see them. And they had all sorts of barriers imposed in front of that relationship. So they intrinsically, I think, feel
right. And we understand it. Like, you took something. Yeah. So to give some people, because obviously I think you made some extremely compelling points here, and we just got the really in-depth view. But I think for most people, if they kind of go sit down with their mom tomorrow and they try and go, hey, COVID passports are bad, some of this is going to get lost in translation. So what would you say? And I'll give it to you first. If someone was going to make the 1 minute argument, the 1 minute pitch for here's why this is a terrible idea, what would you give them as kind of the argument to walk away with?
Well, I would say just try to reframe it. Say, would you support this if it was to report STDs before you hooked up with someone new, or try to strike the chord, because everybody's got a passion. You're saying the person's mom is a real whore. She's walking around with a ton of STDs trying to hook up with dudes, and you know that your mom's gonna know, like, hell no, I don't want no one knowing about these herbs. I guess that's a bad thing for your mom. But, it could even be like, diet restrict, anything like that. Like, do you want to, everybody's got something that they don't want out there and that they disagree with. And I don't think it's in anyone's interest or ethically even very nice or responsible to put people in situations where they have to struggle between like what's best for their well-being and what's best for, I guess, people's general.
Right. It's like, if you know a guy like who likes eating cheeseburgers, do you want to live in a world where you potentially have to report to government that you're consuming this at the hour that I don't know if that example is great. We're an hour and a half in. I'll have to give this more thought. What?
You can never get rid of that evidence in those records, and they can be used, to antagonize you for the rest of your life. And so if it's not a good thing in that circumstance, there's really no circumstance under which it would be an appropriate way to store and communicate your medical history with people.
Right. You know what, along those lines, what might help us build out that argument is I've heard some horror stories in regards to like the 23andMe, the DNA registry, and the FBI like forcibly taking that data from them. But the idea just being here that the collection of data on you, could be like, I don't know, it could be your life insurance policy doesn't have to pay you out because they've got a record of you doing the following reckless activities, and they go, this was outside the scope of what we were trying to insure you for. I don't know that that's the application, but I think to your point, people want to live a life of privacy, and this is definitely down a dark road that potentially really removes any aspect of it.
Yeah, I think maybe the best way to close on this and to really give that 1 minute pitch is just to explain to people that, it didn't look that, it looked pretty innocent when I guess Hitler wanted to buy a bunch of punch card machines, right? It didn't look like he was trying to exterminate an entire race of people. But, things and how they look now, this is big tech's world. This is what they do. They bait and switch you. They tell you it's safe to put your info online. And then cyber stalking starts to happen, and Facebook is sitting there going, oh my God, what a nightmare. We had no idea. I mean, they knew. And so, if we're going to keep falling for these things again and again, then there's no stopping this. But if we see the pattern and we stop it now, we can prevent a lot of other suffering. And I think, if people want to do a sort of way to gain entry into a space with vaccine evidence, let's think of a better way. Let's not subject the whole world to this torture.
Hell yeah. Andrew, thank you so much for coming on and sharing this with us. I mean this. I think it would be worthwhile for you to make this presentation without my interruptions and put it out online. I'd be happy to promote the fact that it exists. I think that I learned a lot, and I think that this was awesome. The audience is going to have learned a lot and enjoy it. But I think there's also some space for you to give this straight pitch, and you've already got the presentation put together.
I wish I had better answers for some of the solutions, but that's for next time, maybe.
All right. Awesome. Seriously. Thanks so much. And you're still out in Brooklyn, right?
Yeah, but I'm moving to Nashville pretty soon. So,
hell yeah.
Come on down sometime.
Awesome, dude. At some point I'll be down there and we'll eat some fried chicken. I know they got the good Nashville chicken. I don't really eat that much fried chicken anymore, but I've been wanting to visit Nashville. So we'll do it, dude. Summer Porch Tour 2022.
Righteous. All right. Well,
when are you moving to Nashville?
Next week.
Fuck yeah. Very cool. All right. Later, dude.
Take it easy.
Peace. Thank you to CPU God for all of the fantastic insights. And now I'm turning over the show to @Pavel Trades, who has some insight for us on how NFTs work. And as everything goes to shit, you want to put all of your money into crypto, and you know where else you want to put it into? Kratom. That's right. Go to yokratom.com, home of the $6 kilo. If this conversation has creeped you out about what's going on in the world, get the one thing that's going to calm you down, and you don't have to worry about your stash running out because you buy a whole kilo of it. How often are you buying a whole kilo of something? Usually you get yourself a stash of something because you're over the age of 21 and you're going to use it responsibly because you're already a fan of this product. But if all those conditions are met, you want to stay calm, you want to enjoy yourself some Kratom in the evening, and you want to make sure that you got a supply that's going to last so that as everything comes down, the whole world falls apart, you're not walking around looking for kilo. You like, I stacked up on kilos of this stuff. I stacked up on kilos of Kratom for just $60. So go to yokratom.com, home of the $6 kilo, and now let's have a conversation with the crypto magic man @Pavel Trades. And this is the guest of guests because he's here to sell you on NFTs. We've been bashing it. We've been saying why they're bullshit. We're saying why it's a load of crock, why, put your money into sandwiches. Keep it out of the NFT game. But then I was hit up by a listener of the show @Pavel Trades. That's the handle, I believe. And he's here to give you the pitch. He's got some NFTs he wants to sell. And so welcome to the show. We're happy to have you here.
Thank you, Robbie. I'm happy to be here. It's an honor to be in your presence.
All right. So most people, myself included, have been looking at the NFTs and just being like, this looks like absolute nonsense. But you're in the
Right.
you're balls deep in the crypto space. You're trading it backwards, forwards, profiting off of everything, and you like it. You like the NFTs, so give us the pitch.
Yes. Well, okay. So NFTs in their current form are definitely in their primordial state. This whole craze right now is definitely a bubble with art. That's not where I think NFTs are going to really have their value. What they're going to really have, like, and you mentioned this on the most recent podcast where you weren't bashing them. You did mention that they did have value, and this is actually where they will have value, is sort of attaching to the real world, is whenever they represent a real world asset, but also it's representing digital assets as well, and connecting those to smart contracts that can then be self-executed on any blockchain. And that sounds, really nerdy. Like when you say it right now, a lot of people don't understand what that is, but so I'll just kind of break it down. So, obviously, an NFT represents a, real world or digital item on a blockchain. And why that's important is because you can now tokenize really anything. Things that couldn't have been sold before on a digital marketplace now can. And there's not a lot of examples of this. This is actually the first time anybody's ever done this with property. But recently there was a guy in St. Louis. He leases out properties, and he sold 0.25% of one property in the form of an NFT. So whoever bought that NFT gets 0.25% of the income from that rental property now. And that alone, is really interesting that that's happening. But I digress. I continue. So the way that really, like, why that's important is that like this with smart contracts is that they are built on Ethereum or other cryptocurrencies that support smart contracts. But Ethereum is the number 2 cryptocurrency in terms of valuation, right behind Bitcoin. What makes like these NFTs like allowed to be like done for so many different things, like whether it's art or real estate or even entertainment or collectible purposes, is that they're programmable through these smart contracts. Ethereum is designed to be a programmable open source cryptocurrency where you can, like I said, you can tokenize now through NFTs anything. Before it was in 20, like we saw in 2017.
So just to take a step back, when a guy sells his fart as an NFT and he makes $80 for it, which is ridiculous.
Yeah.
But what you're actually saying is it's almost proof of concept of the fact that now there's a way that anybody, you can literally monetize a fart. Now, buying a fart for $80 is fucking retarded. Nobody,
Absolutely.
that does not make sense. Or even buying digital art for $69 million also probably doesn't make sense. And there's probably some fraud in that market or some sort of attacks, something going on. I don't know exactly what the play is where there's art that's going for $69 million. But let's just say proof of concept is that there's now a framework where any financial transaction can take place over a smart contract. And so now you got to tell me, so what's the financial, like what's the big benefit that brings to humanity? Like what has changed like from a week ago that now I can digitalize anything and sell that as a contract? How does that push us forward?
Well, now you don't necessarily need a lawyer or a lot of these other middlemen, whether it be, financial institutions or now we're getting also slowly, insurance is also a sector that's being decentralized, also in its infancy as well, like NFTs. But what's really driving the sector is that these smart contracts can connect to any blockchain or now any off-chain resource through oracles. The oracle problem, which was an issue for blockchains for years, with them being centralized, meaning that so every blockchain has what's called an oracle, which fetches any off-chain data. The problem is every oracle on every blockchain is centralized and it can only draw from one data source. So now we have various oracle providers that are able to, through a decentralized network of oracles where various individuals or businesses provide
Can I ask
those
you a question? And
oracles.
this is my, I guess, lack of this is my stupidity, but I'll put it to you so that you can educate myself and the fan base. At the end of the day, I guess if I just want to be able to have a record of transactions, like I understand for Bitcoin why specifically Bitcoin, the decentralization makes sense. Once you have a product like Ethereum, which is not, from what I understand, does not have like that perfect code. And that was like the thing. Was it with Ethereum or Ripple, where like at one point there was the hack, and then they went back and corrected it? I don't
That
remember.
was Ethereum.
That was Ethereum.
Yeah,
which
because there's Ethereum and Ethereum Classic.
Right, which is one of the, I guess if you're a purist, is kind of the complaint with that is that it's not like this perfect decentralized thing because there is a governing body that I guess can go in and make corrections. So I'll just put it to you to explain to like the fans. At the end of the day, if there's value to someone being able to monetize their fart and sell it, which we haven't quite explained what the financial benefit is to all of humanity in being able to do such activities. But why, if we're saying that's good, what's the importance of that being able to be done in a decentralized fashion?
Because now we don't necessarily require a lot of middlemen. Like, for example, with insurance, you're starting to see decentralized insurance become a thing. Not as widely adopted as I or you or anyone else, in the space would like to see, or an interest in decentralization would like to see. But now you're having crop insurance available on the blockchain. You're having life insurance on the blockchain. You're having various.
What is life insurance on the block? Does that like as simple as, let's just say, all right, at the moment, like, for me getting life insurance, I'd have to go to whatever, Mutual Life, whatever. They got their actuaries and they're giving me insurance. Their sales guy gets paid, whatever the fuck they do with, I don't know. But I guess what you're saying is we can almost cut that out where I could like put up my stats on the blockchain, or not really like on Ethereum, and go, who wants to insure this? Now 100 private investors can go almost bet against me, like in how long I'm going to live, and almost like take the opposite side in that contract, which the insurance application is just one application, but it just kind of like, if you just start thinking about like finance and the hive mind and everybody working on different things, so then you can almost have, it's weird starting to look at people's health or life as a casino where people can just take like the opposite side of that. I mean, that's not the pooling risk approach. I mean, you still are pooling risk. It's just, if I was the politician trying to say, this is why this is terrible, I would paint it as, look, there's some guy on the other side that's betting against your health and betting against having to pay out your health. And now he doesn't like, you're taking, but that's insurance works in a similar capacity. It's just easy to demonize this. Anyways, I'm podcasting a really long time tonight, so I'm a little bit more scatterbrained than usual.
You're
so
fine.
Put it back. I'll put it back to you. So let's starting point, decentralized networks benefit. Let's establish that. Forget the NFTs for a second, and the smart contracts. Let's just lay out for the fans why, in your opinion, decentralized financial networks are a benefit.
Well, because they reduce a lot of, for one, they reduce fees ultimately. Right now, blockchain fees are unfortunately higher than I would like them to be, or most people would like them to be. Over time, I think that's going to be fixed as various platforms, go through various upgrades. Like right now, Ethereum is going through the process of upgrading from Ethereum 1.0 to Ethereum 2.0. That's a very big deal right now. They're going from a proof of work to a proof of stake, which I could get into that, but I don't think anybody really wants to hear. But also it sort of allows you more autonomy than in the current system, and allows more people to compete for your dollar or your Satoshi, in this case, your sat, which is 1/1 millionth of a Bitcoin. That's what we call.
Oh, so also kind of what you're saying is, at the moment, if I've got $1 for the most part, I store it in a bank and I get 0 returns on it. If all of a sudden I go to this more decentralized landscape where maybe people actually have better uses for the capital than the bank, which the bank might go issue loans, but they're not really cutting me in on those profits. But like you at Pavel Trades, let's say you've got a really good usage of capital. So in the crypto world where we're cutting out kind of all these middlemen, there's more of an opportunity for me to actually give you my money and basically like a kind of a lending type situation and actually seeing a return on it. I don't know. Is that kind of one of the benefits you're getting at?
No, that's literally one of the benefits I'm getting at. That's actually
Okay.
that's one of the leading things. That was a huge deal this past summer with a lot of these yield farming projects. There was a lot. It's DeFi. It's decentralized finance. It's a whole sector of crypto. It's really huge. Everyone that's listening needs to go look into that. It's amazing. But anyways, so last summer, you had projects like Urine.finance and a lot of these other ones. They just exploded because they were allowing people to essentially, expose themselves to risk on the blockchain and provide liquidity for people, through various ventures that they otherwise wouldn't be able to through traditional lending means. And it's really amazing to see that.
Now, I would just think, to me, if there was ever a marketplace that was ripe for scams, particularly in saying, hey, I'll give you 8% returns on lending me money for a week, or just talk about fucking pyramid schemes, things not quite being like at the end of the day, I mean, even like take a Bernie Madoff type person, the greatest Ponzi scheme outside of the United States government, right? But even him, so you've got networks of traditional things that should have been auditing or should have been able to catch that. I would think that he still exists. You talk about some like crypto thing that's telling me, hey, you can be your own Federal Reserve if you buy into this, and you're going to be building out this thing. Like, sure. My thought is, yes, I guess if I put in early and take out early, maybe I'll be one of the guys who's walking away with my money. But no, do I really think that there's, a lot of people like you that are really finding good allocations for that capital? I mean, maybe I don't really have the time to sit down and do my homework to ensure that.
Right.
So I would think that while it's a promising sales pitch of, listen, there's all these people that have really good allocations for your capital within the crypto space, and they're willing to pay out high returns because they can't get traditional financing. Great sales pitch there. I just swung it. Hire me. I'll go tell that to people.
Right.
The reality is there's nothing in the world that seems more ripe for scams than the crypto space and these kind of promises of 8 to 10% returns on your money, which doesn't exist in any secure asset.
It far exceeds 8 or 10%. It is 8,000 to 10,000%.
Well, that's
APY.
if you're invested in a crypto. That's not if you're lending to someone.
No. That was the actual promised API in some of these contracts for some of these actual.
I mean, how does that possibly exist? How does it possibly exist?
Because it is the Wild West of finance. It is a literal free market of finance. Literally, if you want.
So but now we're getting a little crazy. So what you're telling me is that it's not so much the amount of risk that you're taking. That if you're lending to the U.S. government, you're getting, what is it, 2, maybe 3% on a long-term loan, whatever the hell it is. So it's not that lending to someone in the crypto space is actually riskier. It's that when there's freedom of movement in capital markets, there's actually 8,000% return. That's a ridiculous proposition.
It was real, but that's the thing. A lot of these times, these projects then either exit scammed, because they were truly a scam, or they just collapsed because it was truly unsustainable, because that type of yield is, even in crypto, which can happen from holding long term in some cases, or even trading sometimes, that's not realistically a long shot. Like eight like that it's not realistic. And a lot of these.
Okay, so I didn't mean to trip you up on some random thing. So let's take a couple steps back here, because we're trying to make the positive.
No, I'm just remembering, because it's like, oh man, but also you have some really cool things going on too. Like I said, beyond insurance, you have also, like I said, people are able to have capital that otherwise wouldn't have been able to before. Like I said, like through NFTs now, a lot of people that otherwise actually, like not artists necessarily, but through entertainment, they now can release content on the blockchain. That way they can truly, people that want to support them, like as a content producer, not necessarily an artist, and they can now have something that they own that might be truly exclusive and irreplicable. Sorry, I got a little tripped up there. And that can be
that part only makes sense to me is if you in some ways have a rev share, like for example,
that's what I'm saying. Like if you
Yeah.
if you like say like if like what is it, like Patreon, like will it be like the ultimate level of like a Patreon subscription to somebody?
Right. So
In
the
a sense.
difference,
Yeah.
this is the difference. If I say I'm putting out an episode of the Run Your Mouth podcast, I retain exclusive ownership of the Run Your Mouth podcast, but you get the one token that exists against that Run Your Mouth podcast. I think you and I both agree that token is virtually useless because
Yes.
yes, there is one single token and it's tied to one thing. It's not anything. What
But
would be of value is if I say, hey, I'm giving you a token against this episode of the Run Your Mouth podcast, and now you have 50% ownership of that actual show. And so let's say in the future, this isn't happening, but let's say in the future, CNN buys out the Run Your Mouth podcast and they all want to purchase the entire archive, then you're going to get half of the profits of this archive. Or let's say I take a clip from this episode. This is more likely. I take a clip from the episode. I hire a producer. This is not a crazy theoretical. Let's just Tim Dillon's more talented than me. Tim Dillon's a really funny guy. Tim Dillon makes a lot of money doing this. Great for Tim Dillon. I'm using this as a theoretical. No one bust my balls that I'm being haughty or anything else. I love Tim Dillon. Really funny guy. I also know Tim Dillon before he was making a shit ton of money on his podcast. As a theoretical, you could have invested in Tim Dillon before he became a guy who was making a ton of money on his podcast, and you could have even invested in his back archive. His back archive, which is not something he's done, but you could be cutting up clips and then putting it out on like his Instagram now. You put it out on his Instagram now at 100,000 impressions, and he's good at selling sponsors. All of a sudden, that could be a clip that's making $1,000. So if you were to invest in his back catalog, there is a monetary value there because there is potential. Like, you almost got to realize, like, if I was Seinfeld, which I'm not, and Seinfeld made all the money in the world, so he doesn't need to do this. But I'm almost surprised, like, if you look at the way it used to be, the reason why people bought up his old episodes and, like, they played on, TBS on repeat is because you could put up commercials against it. Think about how much infinitely more you could be doing that right now of cutting up 1-minute clips of Seinfeld, putting them on Instagram with the sponsor at the end. You could be doing, like, nearly endless syndication of your own content via social media. Anyways, look at me now. The sales. So invest in Run Your Mouth. I'm putting up the NFT, and the point is, it might not be worth right now, but I will give you a chance to take part in future revenue. And I am the person who knows how to sell sponsorship on content. So you will own the content with me. You give me your money now, and if in the future I sell advertisers against it on the re-release, like this very moment will be the first NFT I put up. And if it becomes as worth money, 50% rev share at Pavel Trades, will you help me create this NFT and put it on the market by Monday?
1,000%. I think the yield on this is greater than any existing cryptocurrency, even my favorite ones that I'm invested in.
No, but I think that's the point with the NFT, which is what I was making, is like, if I own a Lamborghini and I say I'm keeping the Lamborghini, but you can have the digital token that's represented by this Lamborghini, that to me is just ridiculous. That does not make sense. And even with the digital art thing, it doesn't make a ton of sense because to me, digital art, like, at least with the painting, there was an original version, and you can duplicate the original version. It's never the original. When it comes to digital art, if I'm replicating digital art, it is the equivalent of the original. It might not be the first one, but like it is, you know what I mean? It's digital. It's like, yes.
Yeah. Can I interject on the Ferrari bit? The thing is though, now that like that Ferrari though, like maybe not, you may not necessarily want to sell that Ferrari, like NFT. However, you may mint that NFT. Like for example, you may mint your deed for your Ferrari. And now you want to insure your Ferrari using decentralized insurance. Through that NFT, using a smart contract, you could then connect it to one of those decentralized insurance providers, as opposed to, say, going to Geico or Allstate or one of these other leading, centralized traditional insurance providers. And you could then, at a whim, that's probably necessarily change providers to someone who offers you a better insurance product on your Lamborghini.
Right.
Hypothetically. That's once we have more adoption. But I'm just saying, once we get there, that's what NFTs offer for people. Is they allow real world items to then have access to these digital marketplaces that they otherwise wouldn't play.
Right, but that's not an argument
Yeah.
for why the deed represented by the physical Lamborghini would have financial value to somebody else.
Well, it would, because it actually represents the Ferrari. It represents it represents it.
So let me ask the question differently.
It would have value.
I get that this is lawyerly of me, but I'm going to ask you just to see if we're on the same page or not. If you have a deed that is not represented by the physical asset, it's separate from the physical asset. To you,
you have
does that
both.
have value?
Okay, can you repeat the quote?
I get a Lamborghini.
Yeah.
And I say, hey, there's one. I'm making an NFT represented by this Lamborghini. I keep the Lamborghini. I have full ownership of the Lamborghini. You own the digital certificate that exists in conjunction with this Lamborghini. Does that to you? Does that digital certificate have value?
Yes,
Why?
absolutely. Because that is essential. That is a digital certificate of ownership. That it's on the blockchain. That is as good as any paper document.
But you can't but you can't show up and take the car. I didn't sell you the car. I just sold you a limited certificate that I'm only creating one in conjunction with this card. It's like
if it wasn't just on its own. No, if it wasn't connected to a smart contract that actually was tied to a transaction.
You know what? I'll tell you. What I'm describing is essentially when you get
the token. Yeah. The token on its own is useless, but once it's connected to a smart contract that's connected to these other things on blockchain, it becomes valuable. Is what I'm trying to say.
It's almost like if I got a signed Lou Gehrig baseball bat, and there's a certificate that comes with the bat to say that it's a signed Lou Gehrig baseball bat. Now I can go to an expert without that piece of paper and get it verified, and the baseball bat would be of value, right? So if I sell you just the piece of paper that validates that this other thing is signed, you and I would both agree that piece of paper doesn't really have any value unless it's attached to the bat. So we're on the same page here.
Right.
That the NFT has value when it's attached to a physical object or a service or something of value. The actual NFT not tied to anything doesn't, it's nothing.
That's true. But that person that does have that item and they know it's that item, they could seek out that certificate of authenticity from the person who owns the digital version of it. So to someone, I know it's not widespread value. It's still, I'm probably getting autistic with all this, and this is all very autistic bullshit. Let's be honest. It's all hyper weaponized autism against centralized systems. But yeah, I think that there definitely is, it's going to be a transition. Yeah.
Let's backtrack and just give the big picture. We're going to wrap it up here, but let's give people the big picture pitch. And so I'll throw it to you for 1 minute answers on each of these. So let's just start with advantage of a decentralized network.
You have incentive to keep the network, active and fair. Whereas with centralized networks, you end up with a power imbalance of people at the top. Whereas when it's decentralized, it's more.
I get it. As it goes through
it's a meritocracy.
Right. As it goes through a funnel, the people that can kind of access the choke points are able to just remove some value and some money from it. If it's decentralized, no one person can kind of get access to the honeypot, and so therefore there's less just value kind of sucked out of it. All right, fair enough. Now NFTs. So NFTs we now have a digital ability through decentralized networks for anybody to basically engage in a contract with anybody else. So first, let's just explain what the value of that is. And so I guess it's just, I'll throw it to you. The 1 minute answer, what's the advantage that you can now create a digital contract on a decentralized network with anyone in the world over any asset or service?
Because it opens the door up to competition. It opens the door to literally anybody to enter a marketplace. The barriers to entry now, like I mentioned earlier, I'm going to use insurance because that's the one that I'm most interested. That's up and coming. Besides finance, or actually, we will use finance as another one because now you have finance. You have more lending. You now have decentralized derivatives platforms where you don't have if, for example, you wouldn't have the GameStop situation if it was on a decentralized derivatives exchange, because you wouldn't be able to truly halt trading because the through decentralization, the network would not allow it. The network, it is baked into the protocol also because it's all built on math. It has to execute the way it's built to. And you will also have a lot of other disruptive things. Like it's also going to remove, in my opinion, this was, kind of a libertarian thing. It's going to take away a lot of the powers that the cathedral has, because, like I mentioned earlier with decentralization, these choke points that the powers that be have, it's going to make it harder for them to control them. It's going to allow people to circumvent, not necessarily, I think the state as much, but more so current corporations and, the whole banking industrial complex.
Got it. So now, in terms of the money making opportunities with NFT, so one of them that would come to mind is whoever, like, obviously lawyers are fucking crazy expensive. Now I would think though in the NFT space, maybe you got some sort of a NFT law firm that, as opposed to going to see a lawyer in person, $1,000 an hour or whatever for a contract, maybe now there's people in India putting together NFT contracts for like, $15 an hour, and they're legally sound, and these things are pretty good. And like you said, maybe for selling a house over this digital contract, you're cutting out banks, brokers, whatever other licensing laws of people that manage to get their hands in on the transaction. So what are kind of the new services that are coming up that are kind of worth looking out for?
You have like I mentioned earlier, you have decentralized lending. That's a big deal now. Is really like the most popular way right now is to lend cryptocurrency. However, you do have stable coins, which are tied to either US dollar or British pounds or euros, or, there's also a gold stable coin as well, Pax Gold. But they are able to, what's really up and coming in the space is like I mentioned, I meant to touch on earlier is insurance. That's actually the big area right now after finance. There's a project that I'm interested in. It's called Ethereus DIP. The DIP stands for Decentralized Insurance Protocol. I really like them a lot because they are partnered with Chainlink, which is, like I mentioned earlier, the Oracle provider. So that's the data infrastructure for all these smart contracts and the NFTs and the variable NFTs, which allows them to be edited. Which I didn't touch on this earlier, but like say you had real estate contract and it's an NFT that represents part ownership of a home that is tied to real estate value. That information that's fed to it, it could change, and I'm really heavily invested in the infrastructure of that. And I'm really into oracles like Chainlink. That's the area that I'm into. Oracles, I think, like in 2017, just real quick, last thing, 2017, I think, smart contract platforms like Ethereum, which is what allowed NFTs to become a thing, are going to have, they had really great price action. And I think, this year, like this cycle, because, every 4 years we have a cycle. You can look in the Bitcoin cycle and the crypto cycle. But I think oracles, and especially Chainlink, are going to have, a great year, great remaining.
So what's the investment? How do we make the money? I'm Jewish. Yeah. Tell me. Where should we throw it? All into oracles? Is there an oracle.com?
You can go to chain.link. That's another one. That's what I'm heavily invested in, is mostly, is Chainlink. That's what I'm really into. Disclaimer, the World Economic Forum likes them a lot, which, actually, to get into this a little bit, just touching on this, the technology for these smart contracts and NFTs, it could be used for a blockchain-based COVID passport, which is kind of scary.
We just I just did a hour-and-a-half episode about how that is a horrible perversion of blockchain technology. Yes. So yes. I guess CPU God isn't the only one who's calling attention to that.
Yeah, it's kind of becoming more known that it's an issue. Crypto is, kind of like the internet. I think they're, like DARPA had a hand in the internet. I think there's probably something a little shady with Bitcoin, Satoshi, and, but, like the internet, it's a double-edged sword. They can monitor us and they can sort of keep track of us, but at the same time, we can also connect and organize and sort of fight back and, counterattack.
Got it.
I think that's what blockchain's going to do.
one of the I guess arguments I've heard for Ethereum being a good investment is that Bitcoin, because it's inefficient, you're not really going to see as much NFTs being built off of it. But with the Ethereum, you do have the potential for, I guess, all the NFTs to transact in it, which I guess the same way US dollar has, like, the part of what gives the US dollar like value is at a minimum I can pay my taxes in it. So it's built in that someone will accept my US dollar. So I guess if NFTs are specifically priced in Ethereum and there's demand for these kind of contracts because they're easier, right? Then there's, I guess, more of a demand for the actual Ethereum currency.
Right.
But do I have that accurate, or is that totally?
No, that's completely accurate. Yeah, because you're transacting as in Ether, because that's the layer that these contracts are built on. So that's definitely one of the reasons that it has value. And
I guess on paper, similar to Bitcoin, your institutional players aren't there yet, and this isn't widely adopted, so you can still kind of get in early, or where you think the Ethereum play is kind of played out, and you'd be scared to throw your money in like tomorrow if you had never bought any.
Oh no, I think that we're not going to see like I mentioned earlier, like crypto goes through cycles, and I think we're not going to see the top of the cycle till end of this year, beginning of next year. Although we could be seeing, because of hyperinflation, we could be seeing hyper Bitcoinization. But I do think that Ethereum is actually a better play for this cycle than Bitcoin is. I think that Bitcoin can maybe 4 or 5 times, maybe it go a little more higher from here. But I could see Ethereum going over 20,000. It's under 2,000 as of the time we're recording this. I think it's about 1950. I don't know the exact price. But I think that Ethereum is a great play. I think that there's some decent NFT plays out there. Like Sand is an interesting one. That's one that I'm into recently. It's a blockchain based.
What's your take? Our last guest was big into Monero. Is that one that you like, or?
Monero is okay. I think that an actual privacy coin itself is not really the future. I prefer Ren. It's a privacy network that's secured by tokens. So instead of converting, say, your Bitcoin to Monero, so you can have a completely private transaction, you instead send it to what's called a dark node, which is what they run the Ren network.
It kind of washes it.
Yes, exactly. And so you get washed Bitcoin back to the person that you're sending it to.
Which I believe some of the lending exists for washing purposes, that you can lend your money basically to a washer so that it comes out the other end, all mixed up. They can't track whose Bitcoin was whose, and then you can take it off network and actually have your little private currency with no one tracking it.
Yeah, and those nodes, then they get a small portion of it as a fee, and then those fees add up over time, and then those stakeholders that have tokens, the Ren tokens that run those dark nodes, then get paid according to however many tokens they have staked.
Right. If I wasn't so lazy, I'd actually do more reading on that, because my crypto is the Bitcoin that I purchased that's just sitting in a Coinbase account, which might as well just be like, hey, government, you can have this. It's sitting here.
Yeah, if you're gonna use a more centralized normie exchange, use Gemini. That's a better one, in my opinion. I mean, they have less coins, but I mean, if you're just wanting to invest, I think they have a better long-term holding selection than Coinbase does, because Coinbase has a lot of shit coins, to be honest.
Dogecoin, you buying?
I mean, I'll trade it, but I wouldn't. I mean, it's probably going to go up with everything, but that's not a long-term hold. My long-term holds are personally, my recommend to everybody, obviously Bitcoin's king, Ethereum's great, Chainlink, I love Chainlink. I mentioned Dip's great, Ren's awesome. Recently I've been really into BNT, which is, that's awesome. That's hard to explain, that one. It's a DEX, it's related to DEX tokens. Most people wouldn't get it. And then Synthetics, I'm a big fan of as well. That's a decentralized derivatives exchange. So those are what I hold at the moment. So yeah, but I trade a lot of other coins. So if anybody goes and follows me, I don't tweet that often, but you'll see
when you do,
what
it's a
I'm
fucking
doing.
buy. So, get
Yeah.
ahead of it.
Yeah, when I do, if it's a buy, but that's not financial advice. That's what I'm buying. So that's not not financial advice. Nothing I said was nothing I said. Just disclaimer here. Nothing I said here was financial advice at all.
Mine was buy more sandwiches. Just spend it before inflation comes.
Yeah, buy sandwich coin. Yeah. Well, actually, no.
Is that
not
a real one? You want to make that coin with me after we make that NFT?
I'm game. It probably exists, but we could do it. We could find that. We can make another one. We'll rip them off. Or we could do we'll do a 51% attack. We'll take over their blockchain.
Oh, is that? Oh, dude, that's fucking awesome. A poison pill. A hostile takeover.
Exactly. Literally.
Dude, I'll get myself a briefcase, some suspenders. We'll storm into their office. It'll be fucking awesome.
Well, it's a little nerdier. We're gonna need like a lot of graphics cards to do a complete, we're gonna like just sit there and have like a bunch of graphics cards running.
Well, can I pack my really briefcase with graphic cards?
Oh, hell yeah.
As long as I get a briefcase out of this.
Hell yeah. Oh yeah, you do. They'll probably be hot enough that you can toast the sandwich, the bread for your sandwich.
Yes. Now we're talking, and then we could sell those. Be a whole fucking Ponzi scheme of Bitcoin sandwiches. All right, we're gonna call it there. We've brought this into nonsense territory. Thank you for the NFT education. And anything else you want to plug where people can find you?
Yeah, so you can follow me at Pavel Trades on Twitter. That's really wherever you can find me. But also, I want to shout out my friend, James Gentleman of Blackbird Podcast. Go give him a follow. He had me on not too long ago. It was before I really I've known about NFTs for a little while, but my most recent episode, it didn't click enough, for me to get NFTs to talk about on a podcast until right after I did his most recent one. But if you want to go hear me talk more about, crypto and trading and investing, go ahead and listen to him. And he's awesome. He's a great guy. So, yeah.
All right. That's it. Thanks so much, man. I appreciate you coming on.